Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to today's meeting of the South Planning Committee. Now, before we start, I'll introduce the people on the top table, starting with myself. So I'm Councillor Stephen Clark, Chairman of the committee. And on my right, far right, we have Catherine Hall, our Head of Legal Services for Place. Next to her, we have Richard Woods of Democratic Services. On this side, we have the planning officers and James Rogers, the development management manager. Sitting next to him is James Patterson, the planning officer for our applications number 6 and 7. So without further ado, let's make a start. Item 1, apologies for absence and appointment of substitute members.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies from Councillor Hack and Councillor Cooper. Councillor Parker is substituting for Councillor Cooper. No further apologies.
Welcome, Councillor Parker. Item 2, declarations of interest. Tony Ballaghat-Webb.
I need to declare an interest in item 8, Landolf Mill Lane.
Thank you. Councillor Pritchard.
Chair, I declare an interest with regards to item 6. I am one of the ward councillors, and also what I will do, I won't ask any questions, but I may get involved in the debate later and the vote.
Thank you very much. Councillor Barter.
And likewise, I'm on item 6. I'm a ward councillor for Deanshanger, but having had no previous discussion about this one apart from the site visit or involvement, I feel free to contribute as a member normally would.
Thank you very much. Item 3, the minutes. To confirm the minutes of the meeting of the committee held on the 9th of November. May I sign these minutes? Sue Sharps.
Sorry, I have to declare an interest in item 8. So I've had no interest. I have had no contact with the office regarding this, so I can speak.
Thank you very much. Back to the minutes. May I sign these minutes as a true record? Are we agreed? Thank you. Item 4, Chair's announcements. Members of the public are permitted to film, broadcast and report on the meeting, subject to the efficient running of the meeting not being affected. Only those people who have registered in line with the committee's speaking procedure may address the committee. Members of the public are requested not to call out during the committee's discussions on any item. This meeting is being webcast on the Council's corporate YouTube channel. Therefore, could all of those speaking please utilise their microphones when doing so. There are no planned fire drills, so if the alarm does sound, evacuation instructions will be given by the officers. Please ensure that any devices are switched off or onto silent mode. Thank you. Those are just the standard announcements. Item 5, proposed pre-committee site visits. Are we under control now? Pre-committee site visits. Are there any?
No, there aren't any, Chairman.
Thank you. So we're on to item 6, applications for determination. So we're dealing with Land East of the Meadows, Old Stratford. Mr. Patterson.
Thank you, Chair. So please note the written updates for this application, which corrects an error in the report, provides additional information with regard to financial contributions, and lists the current plans being considered by the committee. There is also a verbal update for this application. The figures relating to housing demand on the Council's housing register in paragraph 7.20 of the officer report relate to figures from March 2023, Revised figures are available from June 2023 as per the letter from the applicant dated 2nd of November 2023. These figures are as follows. 19 people on the register have an interest in 1 bed, 25 for 2-bed houses, 11 for 3-bed houses, and 5 for 4-bed houses. This means there is a total of 60 entrants on the register in June compared to the 38 in March referenced in the officer report. We also have another brief verbal update further to bullet points 2 and 3 in the written updates. We've now received a letter from the Bedford, Luton and Milton Keynes Integrated Care Board. So they've submitted a revised letter with revised contributions, and this means that the Northamptonshire Integrated Care Board will, is expected to withdraw their request for financial contributions. But officers are satisfied that if members were to minded to approve the application, this would be delegated to officers to sort out as part of the Section 106 agreement. So this application relates to a parcel of land to the east of the Meadows and Riverview and to the south of Manorfields Road, as shown in red. The site is open countryside as it lies to the east and to the south of the settlement confines of the village of Old Stratford, which terminates at the curtilage of houses which abut the northern and western boundaries of the site. So I'm just going to show you some photos taken from earlier this week. So again, these should be self-explanatory with the captions, but I'll just explain anything as needed. So this is towards the public right-of-way, looking towards the meadows. This is looking across the field outlined in blue on the location plan and towards the river. So the river is just by this fence here. Yeah, public right-of-way looking north towards Manorfields. This is a view from the top of Riverview looking north away from the application site. This is from the turning head of Riverview looking south onto the application site. Again, this is looking across the western boundary of the site from Riverview. And this is looking from the application site through the boundary treatments out to the open countryside to the south. This is from the southwestern corner of the site looking across the southern boundary. So this is a view from Tombs Meadow in Stony Stratford. I've sort of indicated the rough location as where I stood when I took it. So you can see the application site is sort of here. It's a bit clearer in the next photo where I moved beyond the trees. So you've got Manorfields here and then the meadows and Lakeview there with the application site in front of those. So the application, the application proposes 32 affordable homes, half of which would be available under shared ownership, while the other half would be available for social rent. Access would be provided via 2 extensions off of the eastern turning heads at the end of the Meadows and Riverview. The estate road would then enclose the western perimeter block, while the easternmost dwellings would be served via one of 2 private drives. So this is a plan showing the extent of flooding on the application site. It should be noted that the proposed houses lie outside of flood zones 2 and 3 and would solely be in flood zone 1, which is the least likely designation to flood. So you can see, obviously you've got the key to the left, but you've got the flood zone 3 there and then flood zone 2 on the green line. So we've got a landscape plan showing tree planting, and then another one showing some of the boundary treatments, including obviously hedgerow planting. 10-year plan with the social rent in red, then shared ownership in blue. And then we're just going to whiz through the elevations of the 11 or 12 different house types, but just so members can get a sense of what the development would look like, especially in comparison to the Meadows and Lakeview. Riverview, sorry. So this is just an extract from the material sample, just to give members an idea of the palette. I believe we have conditions which would require samples. And then this is an aerial plan which helps illustrate the context of the land subject to this application. And then finally, we have the committee plan showing the constraints of the site. In particular, you got the village boundary here, and then public right of way here, and then obviously some trees subject to tree preservation orders. Planning officers considered the proposed development would meet the requirements of an entry-level exception site and would therefore be acceptable in principle, while also according with the other planning policies set out in the development plan. Therefore, for the reasons set out in the officer report, officers recommend the application is approved, subject to the recommended conditions and the completion of a Section 106 agreement. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for the officer on the presentation? Councillor Barter.
And I think something that may be key to this is in paragraph 7.6 and also 7.12 of the report. Provision of affordable housing to meet identified local needs. Do we have a clearer definition of the word local? Is it council area wide, or is it intended to relate more specifically to the actual settlement in question?
Mr. Patterson.
Thank you, Chair. So a lot of the affordable housing calculations refer to the legacy South Northamptonshire area. So the local plan area, obviously aspects of the evidence of local need which has been submitted refer specifically to old Stratford, such as the council's housing register. So essentially evidence has been submitted both in terms of the settlement itself as well as the wider legacy South Northamptonshire area. Although I would just bring on the subject of demand, I would bring members' attention to the fact that to meet the requirements of entry level exception sites, you don't have to demonstrate a demand for affordable housing in the area.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm slightly confused with that. Just to go back to what the previous councillor said, there's not been a housing needs survey. It's not attached. If I've read it, and if I've read the report right, and you'll put me right, the last one was 2010. So there's no weight attached to that at all. That just drops off. It's over 5 years. So to say you then drop back to the council housing register, that's totally different. It will be larger numbers there. It's bound to be. You've got to actually link it to Old Stratford, people who've actually got a direct link to get to the housing needs, to get to the affordable housing. So I just don't understand that at all.
So essentially we're talking about demand here, and I think there's several parts of the report. So paragraph 3.5 refers to a similar entry level exception site, which obviously says that affordable housing need survey isn't submitted. And obviously our policy LH3 is also clear in that you don't need to submit a formal housing needs survey, as is paragraph 72 of the NPPF. So whilst policy H3 refers to housing needs survey. That's for rural exception sites, which is different to entry-level exception sites, which are solely affordable housing suitable for first-time buyers and renters. So it is sort of a thread throughout the report. But essentially, you don't actually need to demonstrate demand. You don't need to submit a formal housing needs survey. I think it's in paragraph 7.15, which states that you actually don't need to demonstrate. You don't need to demonstrate demand.
Just coming
Councillor
back,
Parker.
yeah, just coming back. You just said then you don't have to demonstrate a need. I'm sorry, I don't get that at all. You do have to demonstrate a need because it's outside the village confines. And the housing is different because it's affordable and buy to rent and the other one as well, which just escapes me at the moment. So, sorry, thank you, shared ownership, which will by its very nature, if I've got that right, will become, those people will be entitled to buy those houses. So they'll drop off. So I don't follow that at all. You've got to demonstrate that there is a need because it's outside the confines of the village. And you can't drop back to a council housing needs register when it's supposed to be for the people in the district, in that village. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Roger.
So our policies don't specify that a need has to be met, that the need has to meet a particular village need. Effectively, what we're saying in the report through, and I'm actually going to reference paragraph 7.19, the situation we've got in South Northants is there is, in effect, the council has delivered a lot of market housing, but with respect to affordable housing, there's a raft of different data in the report. There's various paragraphs that give sort of various different statistics, but and they relate to different periods. But effectively what they're all saying is that there is an unmet demand for affordable housing, and this development is 100% affordable housing. So I'd have to disagree that the housing won't meet a need. But I think the point Mr. Patterson is making is that the policies don't say it has to meet the need of this particular village.
It just seems very strange to me that other applications which I've been involved in, it has to meet the need of the village. That's why you do a housing needs survey to find out if there's a link back to the village of the people who want to have the houses. Except if you take it wider, you're bound to cover everything. It's just inevitable. But you've still got to identify a link to that location, and that's outside the village confines. So I think that's fairly important personally. But I listen to your point, obviously.
Yeah,
Thank you, Councillor
I
Foley.
was just saying, I think the confusion may partly arise because there are policies. For instance, we've got 3 legacy authorities. So I know the Daventry local plan has policies that do reference housing surveys. So when you've got 3 different plans, it does get confusing. But in effect, in terms of the planning balance officers are applying in this particular application, we're putting weighting on the delivery of affordable housing. Obviously, it is an open countryside site, but we are putting weighting on the delivery of affordable housing, and it's 100% affordable housing. It's a mixture of social rented and shared ownership. So it is definitely 100% affordable housing.
Councillor Bambridge.
Yeah, I'm not at all convinced on this one. Exactly what Kevin has said over there. The point is with this, it is outside the village confines, as we know. It's in open countryside, as we know. It's adjacent to an estate that's got a certain amount of similar housing on it. And at the site visit, the leader of, I think it was the leader of the parish council, made the point that the properties on that have come up have not sold particularly quickly. So we're being asked to consider something that would a piece of land that would normally not be allowed to build on, There's
Yeah,
no
Are you
proof-
coming to a question? It's questions on the presentation.
Yeah, yes, I'm coming to the question in a minute. It's a site that we wouldn't do. My question is, why on earth should we should we support this, which has got a lot of objections, very large number of objections from the residents and the parish council, when there seems to be no proof that warrants giving this what I would consider special permission to build on this site, this type of housing. I'm a great supporter of this type of housing, but in the right place and where it's shown to be wanted.
Thank you.
So my question is, why should we consider it?
So
Mr. Roger.
the authority, and I'm referencing in particular South Northants, which has over an 8-year housing supply, is doing very well at delivering market housing. Where there is difficulty is when it comes to delivery of affordable housing. And this is 100% affordable housing. Had it been a scheme that was, say, 50% market housing, 50% affordable housing, we would have to have dealt with that on its merits, but taking into account that there wouldn't be a benefit from that market housing because that is a demand that is being met because of our strong housing, a strong 5-year housing supply. But because this is entirely 100% affordable housing, officers have put quite a great degree of weighting on that. And that's the reason it's recommended for approval.
Okay, I think that's clear. Are there any further questions on the presentation? Councillor Bagot-Webb.
Thank you, Chair. We obviously walked the site on Tuesday. The rain wasn't very heavy. The ground was pretty soggy with rain. Are we comfortable that this is not going to be a bigger problem with the water lying on the land and causing problems to the properties going forward in the years to come?
Mr. Patterson.
So we've had comments, meetings, and sort of worked with both the WNC Lead Local Flood Authority and the Milton Keynes Lead Local Flood Authority. And they're satisfied that because the housing is solely in flood zone 1 and subject to conditions relating to drainage, suds, and how the water will be discharged off of the site, they're satisfied that it wouldn't give rise to an increase in flood risk on or off of the site. So essentially, we've taken specialist advice and they're satisfied that they can be dealt with, these issues can be dealt with by conditions and wouldn't lead to a worsening of any existing issues, and obviously wouldn't present an unacceptable flood risk to the new dwellings either.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Sharps.
Thank you. I've read the crime prevention officer comments regards to dwelling windows, parking, gable ends, and this to me does not look as if it is in, as you have said, in line with our policies. It looks like it's a mishmash. I like that phrase because it's not too impolite when I say it. But if this is the case, this does not look like we are really meeting our policies regarding high quality housing. Are you able to give me a little more on that, please? Because it doesn't look like the high quality houses within our local plans when described by the crime prevention officer.
Thank you. Mr. Patterson.
Thank you, Chair. So I think comments are fairly strong, to be honest. Discuss it in the design part of the report. So the layout of the houses on Riverview and the Meadows have led to some contrivances in terms of the layout of the plots. So for example, plots 1 to 3 are set back so as to not interfere with the outlook of the dwelling next to them, and the same with plots 10 to 12. unfortunately, obviously having to set these back in order to ensure neighbours' amenity isn't unacceptably harmed, it has led to some contrivances in the design. But we're satisfied that the overall layout still complies with our principles in terms of particularly the perimeter block layout overall, in terms of garden land being concentrated to the rear, you know, where it's less susceptible to being subject to antisocial behaviour. Obviously, there's a couple of aspects which you know aren't optimal in terms of the layout of a couple of the alleys, and some of the gardens have slightly more frontage on the street than is obviously ideal. But I think her comments are fairly strong. I think it's also worth noting that she didn't actually formally object to it, and obviously officers have considered their comments in assessing the application. So I think we're not of the view that it substantiates grounds for refusing the application.
Thank you. Councillor Clubley?
Yeah, I'm very familiar with this particular area and the, you know, the lovely nature of Old Stratford and its close proximity around the Ouse Valley Park. And I know that there have been previous planning applications which have gone to appeal and have been refused on the basis that the development would cause unacceptable harm to the character of the area and countryside, since it would urbanise the site and in views from to verbally extend the village southeastwards towards the river. So on those applications, it was said that a development around that area would cause unacceptable harm to the character of the area. And I wondered why it's considered that this wouldn't.
Good question.
Thank you, Chair.
Patterson?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry. So I provided a commentary on this in 3.3 and 3.4. Essentially, the planning circumstances of the site have changed since that time. Since obviously more development has taken place at Riverview, which has changed the character of the site and the backdrop. So that's worth noting, and it's also worth noting the different policy contexts. So obviously those appeal decisions are pre-MPPF. So officers essentially have a view the planning circumstances of the site have changed and are satisfied that for the reasons set out in the landscape part of the report, that the proposal wouldn't unacceptably harm the character of the area or wider landscape.
Thank you. Are we done with the questions to officers on the report in the presentation? Yes. One more question, is there, Councillor Shaft?
You stated that it was not ideal when you answered my question regarding the layout. I don't think we're aiming for not ideal. We're aiming for the best possible plan of any housing situation in our county. And Councillor Clubley has pointed out that this will change for the long term.
Is there a question here?
There is a question, yeah. Can I also ask why there is no play equipment anywhere on this? Because yet again, as I will keep saying it, we keep seeing flood items, but no play equipment.
Mr. Patterson?
So with regard to play equipment, I think the first half was kind of more commentary, so I'll just respond to. Oh, okay. Could you repeat the? Yeah. So with regard to play space, the development isn't large enough to trigger the requirement to provide formal play equipment.
The first question I asked was, this is not ideal. Why are we allowing not ideal?
Well, it's responding to the constraints of the site, and there will always be constraints which inform the development. So it's the same as any other site where obviously the constraints affect either the layout or the appearance or something like that. So in this case, obviously, It's responded to the constraints of the site in terms of neighbouring amenity, which has led to this layout, but officers still think it accords with the overall aims of the design guide.
May I state that 3.3 stated that 15 previously did not make the best use of the space provided. So if we're not making the best use of the space provided, can I suggest that we change the plan?
So part of the issue with that was that they were proposing 15 houses on the site, not 32. So it was a density issue in terms of they weren't making an efficient use of the land, which isn't the case here because they're providing twice as many houses on the same site. So it addresses the appeal decision relating to paragraph 3.3.
Mr. Roger?
I think, sorry, councillor may disagree with us. I think too much is being read into the crime prevention officer's comments. The crime prevention officer will always have preference in terms of alleyways and various different types of housing layouts. Officers do not look at this particular layout and have the view that it's causing any particular serious problems in terms of crime or issues. And in fact, the majority of the crime prevention officers' comments are to do with points of detail such as height of fencing and trellises, and so I don't think that there was actually a serious issue that the layout of the development is in any way flawed. Officers think that the proportion that the amount of dwellings on the site is an appropriate amount given the size of the site, and there are not any, as I see it, any standout issues in terms of design, neighbour impact, or layout. I think the key issue here is simply the principle of the development, that you've got that issue of the tension between delivery of affordable housing and protection of open countryside. I think that's the core issue here. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor McCord, I saw you passing a note to Councillor Parker. It's no calling out, no notes, I'm afraid. Thank you. Councillor Bagot-Webb.
Thank you, Chair. I want to come back onto the answer that was just given to my member colleague next to me about play equipment. I can understand the answer that the 32 doesn't trigger it, but it's 32 more on the development that's been expanded from the meadows. So we can keep adding 32 by the sound of it and not trigger play equipment. Is that something that we should be looking at?
Mr. Roger?
I mean, it's difficult because we have triggers in effect. This is a standalone, this proposal is a standalone development proposal. It's been, there's quite a long time lag between the adjoining housing and this development proposal. I don't think anybody thinks this is the developer. Well, it's actually separate applicants in effect. So
based on what you're saying is we can continue to build 30 houses, 30 houses, 30 houses, and never be required to put play equipment in.
It's Councillor Barrett, your question, please.
Thank you. Yeah, it's an extension of that, actually. Although there's no obligation, you know, from a moral conscious point of view, we should be obligated to do that because we've got an additional 30 number of families, which will, there'll be particularly potentially younger families too. We've got 39 weeks of the year they're at school. There's a lot of time when they're not at school, for example. So I think it's naive not to forward plan. And I agree, you're telling us that there isn't an obligation, fine. Shouldn't there be a criteria that we can state within developments such as these? There is a provision made on the preamble of who's going to populate them. I appreciate what you're telling me, but I also hear what I just heard there. If we have 3 of these developments under 30, that's not meeting a threshold. What we're going to do for those young families, young people, to keep them entertained as well. So that's a significant concern of mine, that although you're saying there's no obligation or legal duty to do that, you know, that design there looks like there could be place for a play area there. Why don't we make that an obligation on developments such as these to keep those younger people, those younger families entertained as well?
Thank you. Mr. Roger?
So to a certain extent, I don't disagree. Obviously, as planners, there's a whole raft of things that we will consider when dealing with an application. And for instance, this application, in paragraph 8.2, we've got a load of financial contributions towards education and various infrastructure. So we are trying to, on a site like this, you've got flood attenuation, you've got parking, we're trying to deliver as much affordable housing as we can. It is difficult when you have a place-based threshold that the level of housing falls below in effect. So were we to have introduced place-based on this site, there would have been a reduction in affordable housing. So there's always tensions. But unfortunately, because the threshold isn't met, it's difficult for us to then insist on a place-based but being provided on a site such as this.
Is there another question?
So who sets the threshold for these then? Is it us, Royal Us? If so, aren't we you're thinking big picture holistically here? If I was a developer, I'd just come in under a threshold every time. No, I'm not going to have to. I'm going to make more money because I'm going to have more units to sell. So I'm going to be under a threshold all the time, aren't we? And we're systematically seeming to allow that because of what you just said there.
Sorry, effectively, in terms of place-based, we're referencing the Part 2 local plan. I mean, this particular application is from a registered social landlord. It's an actual affordable housing provider. So perhaps what I should have said earlier is that both the planning team and our housing team have had involvement in the evolution of this particular planning application. And it's, as I said earlier, it's because of the delivery of affordable housing that officers are recommending approval of this application. It is often, perhaps what I was trying to explain, it is often very difficult to tick every single box when in effect, when you are delivering housing sites such as this, but we do our best to ensure that the best possible layout is brought forward.
I'm turning to the public speakers now, and I shall go in the order of objectors, parish and town councils, if we have them, and then the applicants and agents. So for this one, I call Leslie Greenwood, a local resident who is an objector. If you come to the desk in front of me here for public speaking, and press the button in the centre of the microphone, you're then live and can speak.
To date, several residents of the Meadows have been refused health insurance on the grounds of living within 200 metres of a known floodplain. Plots 29 and 30, shown as bungalows on the development plan, are being sited where flood water comes into the field. Therefore, we fear these residents will have no upstairs to escape to in the event of a flood. The latest development plan that we found in the supporting documents, EAS report July 23, shows the Suds Basin in the floodplain, which it clearly still is. Can you assure us that you will look at this placement and ensure that this is of an adequate size and structure to serve its purpose? Learning from what happened at 3000 Trucks and Oxfield Drive, we, the residents of Old Stratford, would be happy to pay for an independent survey for due diligence in the unlikely event that you approve the application. Section 7.44 of the report states that development must not unacceptably harm the amenity of occupiers and users of neighbouring properties and the area through overshadowing or result in loss of privacy, sunlight or outlook. Looking at the plan, plots 12 and 13 will overshadow houses numbered 32 and 31 in the Meadows. Section 7.46 states there is a potential to impact the sun on Manor Fields Road all day. This contravenes section 7.44. Section 7.48, plots 13 through to 20, directly back onto the gardens of Manorfield Road, resulting in loss of privacy, again contravening section 7.44. What mitigation will be put in place to guarantee no loss of privacy or light? If you insist on this development, would it not be better to build more bungalows and site them on the side backing onto current residents' gardens, thereby eliminating the light and privacy issues? The arguments for the proposed development being an entry-level exception site are based around it having affordable housing that will meet a specific local need for first-time buyers. Which first-time buyers buy 4-bedroom houses? However, we refute this because the local parish council have not been consulted and advised that there is an overstock to meet this need. Given the disproportionately high amount of housing development already allocated to Old Stratford compared to other Category 3A villages and even larger Category 2 parishes, we contest this is an unfair allocation of greenfield land that does not satisfy the Settlement Hierarchy Directive or WNC local plan. We request that you make this evidence public so we can look at it and comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we have Mr. Graham Sharp, a local resident, to speak to us as an objector.
Good evening, Chair and Committee. The meadow on which the development is proposed has been an asset to the community for decades. It's been used by families for recreation activities for at least 60 years. It has been used for grazing by livestock and today is still used by many members of the community for recreational purposes and encompasses 3 footpaths as detailed by Ordnance Survey maps. When the floodplain is in use, the field to the south side also becomes inaccessible and therefore the meadow becomes the sole place to walk. It is a green space site that serves our community. It is outside of the village confines and provides a habitat for multiple species, including a colony of bats, which are seen in most gardens along the boundary of the meadow in the warmer months at dusk. With regard to the ecology, the report outlines various proposed ecological enhancements to secure a biodiversity net gain, most of which will be placed in the Western Field. As I speak, that area is underwater. Though I'm not an expert, I suspect the frequent flooding would have a negative impact on the biodiversity. It is not uncommon for the floodplain to be underwater for several days throughout the year. Further, one of the conditions is that the CEMP and LEMP are carried out fully and successfully. Although the CEMP needs to be completed before first work commences, the LEMP needs only to be approved before first occupation. We believe this will be too late. There is no demonstrated need for affordable housing within the village. The parish council have not been consulted as to these requirements. It is our view that by using this meadow, the council has been able to approve more housing in Old Stratford than they would otherwise have been able to do, had green spaces needed to be included within earlier plans. The report makes multiple comments about sustainability, including references to local amenities. The various shops within walking distance can only refer to Stony Stratford. Old Stratford has one small shop. Employment opportunities within the local area must also only refer to Stony Stratford. A private survey on the 4th of December found no vacancies in Old Stratford. Further, the report details good transport links. For the record, there is no bus service to Towcester. A journey to Towcester will take between 1.5 and 2.5 hours. It is not possible to arrive for a day's work in Northampton or Towcester using public transport. One of the largest employers in the area, the Open University, lies circa 80 minutes away by bus. Planning applications on this site have been turned down on several occasions in the past. Given the number of new developments in the village over the past decade, if anything, the reason for refusal should be even more clear today. Taking away this community green space from the village will have a detrimental effect on the current and future residents of Old Stratford.
Thank you, Mr. Sharp. I must stop you there. You've had your 3 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Committee.
Thank you. Now we have Nikki Lawrence, the clerk of the Old Stratford Parish Council. Speak to us.
Good evening, Chair and Committee. Our first key observation is that South Northants has land bank availability greater than the government recommended 5 years. We therefore believe there's presently no justification for the building in this location in accordance with policy R1, which requires exceptional circumstances for development outwith the defined village confines. This policy appears to have been given little weight by the case officer, and it's noticed that the report seems biased towards policies that support the applicant's position. We would like you to consider that although the council has not fulfilled its criteria for affordable housing, is the committee satisfied it needs to be located outside of our village confines? The parish council also believe the considerations of the planning inspectorate in the recent appeals are still valid, in that the current proposals would result in a loss of openness and urbanisation of this area of open countryside and would harm the character and appearance of its rural surroundings. This proposal for affordable dwellings is not dissimilar to that rejected at appeal, where the inspectorate highlighted a lack of demand for such housing. The parish councils still do not believe that there is a need for further affordable housing in Old Stratford at this time. Less than 2 months prior to this application being made, Bedfordshire Pilgrims Housing Association applied for amendments to the affordable housing paragraphs of their Section 106 agreement. This was in the development known as the Meadows, immediately adjacent. This change to the Section 106 will facilitate removal of the affordable status of the properties. We therefore challenge the planning officer's opinion in 7.13 of their report, which states officers are satisfied the development would be capable of satisfying the policy through an appropriate Section 106 agreement, which will secure the affordability of the dwellings in perpetuity. It appears that the Section 106 conditions can be altered in future and are therefore not set in perpetuity. The lack of housing needs survey to justify this development is therefore concerning. The applicant is relying on assumptions that there is a demand for such housing in a village with poor transport connectivity. Contrary to the plan submitted, a section of the site closest to the river is known to flood. While some degree of protection would be afforded to the proposed housing by reprofiling the site, the additional hard standing and profiling would likely increase the flooding in neighbouring areas. The planning officer refers to sustainability throughout their reports, but in consideration of social and economic factors, we believe that development at a floodplain location would significantly increase insurance costs for occupants, if indeed it can be obtained at all. Surely the insurance of an affordable home needs to be affordable also. For these reasons, we respectfully request that the committee consider and reject this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nicely timed. Councillor McCord as local ward member. Yes. Okay. Councillor McCord, could you speak clearly into the microphone, please? Yeah. Start when you're ready, Councillor McCord. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Firstly, as ward member colleagues sit on the committee, I'm speaking and using some of their time as well, but these are my views and they're not theirs, and they will represent and say what they wish themselves. Chairman, I wish to invite committee to refuse this application. And I first want to set on record my opposition to the way these reports get written. Officers are supposed to be neutral, but planning officers' reports take sides. And rather than set out facts in a dispassionate way, they're taking sides as an advocate for whatever side of the argument they wish to promote. We need to have neutral reports with no recommendations presented to planning committees and let members decide. The report sets out that there have been 84 resident objections, 10 times the number supporting or not objecting, and these mostly relate to traffic, loss of biodiversity and flooding. And whilst many of the issues have been picked up in the report, the message we are sending is that local folks with local knowledge of daily real life are inferior to our so-called expert class on theoretical models and overconfidence that they know best. They don't. I question the need. Time and again, we refer to 38 throughout the report, and State Housing Needs Survey is simultaneously up to date and out of date. Also, normal to hold two contradicting positions is the evaluation of policy H3. We get simultaneously told this is not an H3 application and not planning policy or wrong to think so. However, that then take a lot of time to explain the H3 alleged compliance despite all the usual yeah but no but planning approach to disregard the inconvenient, reinterpret the policy and make up the stuff to plug the gaps. Now, Chairman, you said you saw me pass a note. It was precisely that. It was to say to member colleagues that H3 does require a local needs survey. LH3 does not require a local needs survey. I wasn't asking them to vote one way or the other if that was your concern. And they did such a thorough job in confusing themselves. You can see by the incoherent answers that members managed to get to their questions. Even the officers have confused themselves. WNC Highways objected, but withdrew that objection when the new drawings were presented. But residents mention the daily dangers of using the local roads in reality, not the lovely theoretical land of milk and holly that they occupy. The report dismisses residents' concerns with a single sentence saying that no one should park within 10 metres of the junction. Unfortunately, here in the real world, neither the police nor the council will enforce the bad parking, so the problem is a live and real one. The daily reality of parking does not follow the theory. It will be different and it will cause problems. Flooding too is a real concern. MK objected and would appear to be less worried rather than satisfied, I think would be a more fair assessment. And whilst the report arrogantly states that it is Northants as the lead flood authority, they get and basically say to MK Council the equivalent of council to council being told to do one. But the water will end up in the MK area, so they are right to have a concern. And WNC needs to be a good neighbour and not plonk down houses that will be a flood risk elsewhere. I note that MK state in their original letters that the flooding in 2020 did not follow the mapped areas. It is more severe on the areas the maps show as lesser affected. In short, the reality of flooding did not live up to the desktop assessments. I didn't read anywhere in the report that this has been sorted. And if we know the water does not go the way the maps show, how long shall we leave it before changing the maps based on the most recent flooding experiences? The site is outside the village confines, has been mentioned many times. And with an up-to-date land supply, we can't really justify it on that basis. And nearby to the site, the PC comments that affordable housing has had its tenure changed, which again hardly supports the contention that there is need. The NHS have confirmed there's no capacity to deal with the health needs of future new residents. And if the committee must approve this, then we at least have a condition or a legal agreement that prevents any viability test challenge to the change of mix on these grounds? And can we ensure that if these properties are to be sold, there's a legally binding agreement that the council gets first refusal? On balance, I think this development will cause more issues than it will solve, and it should be refused. And I invite the committee to do just that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Whilst we note the point made by Councillor McCord about policy H3, the passage of notes is not permitted from the public gallery to members of the committee, and the note should therefore be disregarded. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And now we have the agent for the applicant, Mr. Pete Chambers, to speak to us. And the drainage consultant for the applicant is available as well for him to deal with any questions.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Pete Chambers and I'm a Senior Associate Town Planner at David Lock Associates, based in Milton Keynes. I have on Zoom, we have Mariana Diason, the drainage consultant, and she'll be able to answer any specific questions on that topic. Mr. Patterson has comprehensively considered the proposal in his committee report, and I would simply like to highlight the following 3 key points. Number 1, the proposal seeks to help meet the district's substantial need for affordable housing. Over the last 20 years, home ownership has increasingly become unaffordable for first-time buyers. Median house prices in the district have doubled between 2003 and 2021, but incomes have only increased by 37%. These are your numbers. A household income of 47,000 is required to buy a standard market home. The council's housing and economic needs assessment identifies over 1,500 households living in unsuitable homes, homeless, concealed households, overcrowded, or in need. The Joint Core Strategy set a requirement for 3,300 affordable dwellings in South Northants between 2011 and 2029. Your October 2023 housing land assessment states need has been unmet in all years since 2011, with an undelivery of 982 affordable homes. There were just 75 affordable homes completed in South Northants last year against a target of near 400 per year. The district's housing register identifies 60 households, not 38, in need of affordable rented homes and who would consider being rehoused in Old Stratford. The demand for shared ownership is in addition to this. Discounted affordable rent and shared ownership homes are proposed, ranging from 4-bedroom detached family homes to 1-bedroom masonettes and bungalows. Around half will be built to lifetime home standards, which will allow flexibility to allow them to be adapted for easy wheelchair use or for those with reduced mobility. Point 2, the proposal is compliant with both national policy and your local plan policy. Both the NPPF and policy LH3 of part 2 of your local plan seeks to assist in meeting the affordable housing crisis by supporting entry-level exception sites. These are proportionally sized sites which are suitable for first-time buyers and those looking to rent their home. They should be adjacent to existing settlements. This is your policy again, but not currently allocated for housing, and adjoin secondary villages such as here in Old Stratford. Point 3, there are no technical objections from your officers to this planning application. On drainage, homes are proposed outside of areas at risk of flooding. Mitigation measures will slow down surface water so that there is a benefit downstream. Both the Environment Agency and local lead flood authority are content. On highways, 2 vehicle accesses will serve the site through the existing development at the Meadows and Riverview. Highways have found the proposals to be acceptable with regard to safety, impact on junctions and parking provision. The council's housing officer supports the scheme. Finally, and importantly, planning permission will deliver a new 1 hectare
I'm going to
public
stop you there.
riverside.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions to the applicant? No? Aha. Councillor Sharps.
Were you aware that residents were unable to get house insurance in the local vicinity?
That hasn't been brought to our attention, but it's not something that would necessarily come up in a planning application. We would need to look into the detail of that because frankly, no one in the Meadows or Riverview, to our knowledge, has that problem.
Okay.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you. Obviously, you've heard the discussion earlier around facilities, et cetera. Although you're not obligated to, would you consider children play equipment? Would you consider adding that within it, within your scope of work?
So I think the Mr. Patterson raised the point that a scheme that is heavily constrained and is providing a particular type of house tenure can only do so much. When submitting a planning application, you have to balance all of those elements in coming to your layout. And the way that these things tend to work is that you end up with a multiplier. So whether it's a full play area or 0 point whatever of a play area, the way that my experience of these things work, typically an applicant is then asked to provide a offsite monetary contribution to upgrade local facilities elsewhere. And we haven't had the aerial photo up there, but there is a significant play area and playing fields the other side of Deanshanger Road. Now, in an ideal scenario, if there had been a allocation for housing much larger, then yes, you would do all those things. But that would be the way that I would, historically, I have seen these things dealt with.
Okay, thank you. That's a really political answer. Like you've gone around the houses there, literally, to give me a no. So we've heard the constraints on numbers, and you've said essentially if you had to, you would, basically, is what you're saying to me. That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking, you heard 3 councillors within this room speak quite passionately around facilities. From a moral obligationary point, we're going to have young families, we're going to have children. You don't have to do it. Technically and legally, you don't have to do it. But where is that from a moral point of view, as a developer, as a affordable housing developer too? Where do you lay there from that perspective now?
I think the application is the one before you for a start. And members have to make a decision if they want to lose plots off as a scheme, which is providing much needed open space, much needed affordable homes. If you want to swap that for a play area, then that is not within your gift as a policy, and that's not what's set out in the local plan. I don't think it's in, once again, I don't think it's in members' gift to say, if you change this, then we will approve it. Because that's.
I don't think I said that for the room, did I?
No, so
no,
I.
So you need to withdraw that comment because
So,
say that. So, no, hold on.
It's a clarification. Can I clarify the point?
No, before, not until you withdraw what you just said.
Whatever I said, whatever
Can we
you
move
think
on,
I.
please, from this?
The scheme is the one before you, Councillor Barrett.
Right. Are there any further questions for the applicant? Councillor Parker.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Your comment was interesting at the first point. You said it will meet the district housing needs, not the local housing needs. And plainly, it won't, because there's not a local housing need assessment been done. So you've actually building this for the district.
So you have your district housing need is substantial, as I outlined in my.
Yeah, I understand all of that.
There is no, if I may, there is no up-to-date housing need assessment because your policy, LH3, does not require it. But what we are clear on, and your housing officer has indicated, is that there are 60 folk on a local register who would accept a house within Old Stratford who'd like to live there. So that is the evidence before you. You've got a significant undersupply of 3,300 affordable homes that you should be providing between 2011 and 2029. And you're nowhere near that target. So what I'm suggesting is that this is meeting both the district need, and the housing register would indicate that there is a local need as well.
Yeah, it's quite interesting what you say. Obviously, you're fully aware that there's a new plan coming into force soon in 24-25, which will go to 2041. So that actually will take out any local of the 3 areas. There'll only be one. So I'm sure the people who sit on the committee there will be looking at that particular area. Parking is obviously not up there because we screens there. Why are we going for tandem parking and things like that? I mean, that just seems an old-fashioned way. Why don't we just put garages so people can park on their site?
The scheme is drawn up and meets your parking standards.
Right, so everything you do then always drops back to our standard. You never go above that standard. Is that what you're saying?
Once again, Councillor, it's about making the most efficient use of the land. So in the aim to meet a provider scheme that is helping to meet your affordable housing need, we have to balance all of your policies, just as you have to come to your own decision. So we are seeking to meet all of the ecological and the drainage and the other elements that go into this, highway safety. The parking layout as provided has been through your highways officer colleagues who are content with the layout.
Okay, so going back to the first question, when you said it meets the district level, which district are you referring to?
You're going to test my knowledge of which parking standards that use your...
No, sorry. when you talked about it will meet the housing needs for the district, which district were you talking about?
So the joint core strategy is where your 3,300 affordable dwellings comes from for the South Northants part of the site of your district. There is the housing register, as I say, is for Old Stratford.
So the housing register is just for South Northants, which is what you're referring to?
No, the housing register
Is for South Northants.
you would have to speak to your housing officer as to how they come to that number, but as I
You
understand it,
don't know.
it's for as I understand it, your housing officer works for West Northants, so it would be and it would make no sense for somebody in Daventry presumably to wish to live in Old Stratford. It's the local connections, but frankly, I would ask you to ask your head of planning on that one.
Yeah, sorry, I thought you might know that because you seem very intent about talking about the local needs, and then somebody at Daventry might not want to live in Old Stratford. Well, they might do if they've got a mother and father living there, so they'd have a connection.
Yeah.
So the one you talked about, we've not meet certain figures, that's across the whole West Northants.
I believe every of the former districts within the wider authority have that shortfall. But there was a specific South Northants area which falls within which you aren't. Clearly, we're jumping around a little bit here because at one level you're asking me to demonstrate that there's a local need, which I'm trying to assist you with by showing what your plan is indicating for South Northants. But on the other one, unless I'm mistaken, you're asking me to give you the West Northants totals.
Well, you just need to swap between each one, and I just wanted clarification. I didn't want to sort of think something which was incorrect.
I'm very happy to try and clarify it again from what I've just said. The joint core strategy set a requirement for 3,300 affordable dwellings in the South Northants between 2011 and 2029.
Councillor Parker, when we come back to this with the officers, perhaps they can help you with the clarification.
And I've only got
you're seeking.
one more question. I'll go off of that there, Chair. Sorry.
Right.
Sorry, bear with me. I apologise. You're putting you're putting electric charging points into each dwelling. Are you putting PV panels on the roof?
Don't believe they are within the scheme, no.
Oh, I thought that was legislation.
When you say legislation,
Yeah, I thought there was a new regulation about PV panels on new houses. No doubt the officer can put me right on that one.
Councillor
Okay,
Sharps.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Councillor Sharps.
Thank you. You've spoken at length about our plan, our local plan, so you're clearly very knowledgeable, most probably more than everyone here, but that's because it's your job, and that's right, that's wonderful. When we spoke, when I asked you earlier regarding the flooding and whether or not you had knowledge of anybody being able to get insurance, you said you didn't. What will happen to those people that move into these houses or want to rent them if they can't get house insurance? Because that is something that really matters to me as a councillor. I won't want to see anybody not be able to insure their home. So what will be your strategy?
I can't understand why anybody would not get house insurance within the site, because all of the homes are outside of the flood zone. So none of the dwellings to be built are within. They're all within flood zone 1. Okay. So outside the flood zone. So if that is the trigger for you not to get housing insurance, it is not my area of expertise, but by the sound.
The point on housing insurance is not a planning matter.
It's just a question. It's a question, and I just wanted to ask it.
Does that help? Yeah, they're all outside. They're all outside the flood zone, so they should not be unable to get house insurance. And I would also say that it's not in the interests of a registered social landlord or a housing association to build any homes for folk who won't be able to then move in because they won't get insurance.
No, and that's why I wanted to ask, because I felt that where I left it was a little unfair. But thank you. The other thing is that we've heard from residents how difficult it is to travel. So obviously, social housing, people that come and live in social housing very often don't have the means of cars or a great deal of extra cash. We have a anti-poverty strategy and a Thrive strategy in West Northamptonshire, which we're both very proud of. How do you think this housing estate sits within that?
So clearly the Old Stratford is well linked to both Stony Stratford and Milton Keynes. That's where the vast majority of folk we pulled for their day-to-day activities. The doctor's surgery, as Mr. Patterson indicated, it's the Milton Keynes Trust who's seeking expansion of the doctor's surgery there. There are bus stops in close proximity. Stony Stratford is approximately 2 miles walk. Deanshanger Road is not a well-trafficked road in terms of the advice that we've had from your traffic officers. The movements aren't north towards Towcester. It's south towards to Stony and into Milton Keynes. Old Stratford is a second tier level settlement within your local plan again, which would indicate that the authority itself considers this an appropriate location for development.
Councillor Bambridge.
Yeah, should you build these houses and you can't find sufficient occupants, what would happen to them?
I would very much doubt that that would be the case, given the numbers that we've just been through in terms of district need and local need. There's no scope for this just to turn into a market housing scheme. The application is for an affordable home scheme. And I think in truth, what would happen is a new planning application would have to be submitted. It wouldn't be, I think there's a suggestion that there's a deed of variation that would be able to remove the affordable housing. I don't believe that that would be the case in this instance. I also do query whether this, the reference to deed of variation in the Meadows is correct. Our understanding is that that is solely relates to the lending and the borrowing facility of the housing association. It hasn't changed the housing to market housing from affordable. But once again, I would ask your colleagues, planning officer colleagues,
I'll ask the
clarify that
officers to
one.
deal with that point. Are we done with the questions then? Yeah, the insurance point as well. Yeah, Richard.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, the advice I've received in regards to this insurance issue that's been raised is that it's not a material planning consideration and therefore should not form part of your considerations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Mr. Roger.
I'd firstly say with reference to the Meadows, the agent's assessment is correct. It is not, it's actually an application that hasn't been determined. That's the most important point. So if it was implied the decision has been made, a decision has not yet been made on that application. Therefore, that in itself means it has, well, it doesn't have any particular weighting or relevance to your decision, but also it is correct what the agent is saying. It's to do with some details of the financing. It's not in effect turning an affordable housing scheme into a market housing scheme.
Solar panels.
There are changes to the building control regulations coming forward, so it is actually likely that the developer will be forced to do solar panels. And what's happening on a number of schemes is applicants are varying the schemes to include solar panels when they didn't have solar panels because they're required to on the building regs. What I do know is that it doesn't apply for developments that are partly built, but as nothing's been built here, it's very likely that the councillor is correct. And if permission is granted, it's highly likely the applicant will need to come back and vary the scheme to include solar panels based on my understanding of changes coming forward to the building regs. But so hopefully answers that particular point.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mr. Chambers. before I start the debate, do members have any further questions of the officers on what you've heard so far? Mr. Connolly.
Yeah, just a legal one if possible. Obviously, it's been quite an intense debate, very interesting, and there doesn't seem a lot of appetite for the development. But I was just wondering, obviously, because our officers are our experts, if this was to be rejected, would the developer appeal, and how successful would he be in turning that decision over?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually, I wanted to come in and give some sort of general guidance to members in any case. So there is some planning history for this site, and that's quite important because previous inspectors have basically tried to assess the merits between different amounts of housing with different tenures, and then tried to balance that against any harm to this particular piece of open countryside. So what's in, and one of the things I would draw upon is you'll see references on pages 18 and 19 to how sustainable the site is, but actually that's, if you look at the text, it's more focused in terms of the character and appearance and the rural surroundings that is really the sort of focus. So in terms of what would the harm be, what I think the decision before you here is the benefit of the delivery of affordable housing. And I have to say, all of the numbers do point towards there being a benefit in the delivery of affordable housing. I have to just, I've got to say this, I do strongly disagree with any members implying there isn't a need or benefit of the affordable housing. That would weigh heavily in favour of the scheme. And I think any planning inspector would put weighting on that. But then the planning inspector will have to consider any harm, and all of the expert advice is saying that the highways and drainage can be dealt with acceptably. So effectively, what an inspector will be looking at is the balance between the benefits of the affordable housing, which is 100%. So it's relatively straightforward, the benefit. It's not complicated by it being part market housing. It's 100% affordable housing. But then the inspector would also look at this particular parcel of land, the harm that's caused by developing on that piece of open countryside. So effectively, a planning inspector, were this to go to appeal, it'd be those two issues they'd be weighing up and then deciding whether to allow or dismiss a planning appeal. And I would actually steer members to focus their debate on how they feel that balance sort of works in effect. Obviously, the view of your officers is that we're putting a lot of weighting on the delivery of affordable housing, and there's a lot of different numbers in the report that are also referenced by the planning agent in that respect. But ultimately, I think the decision before you is, how do you feel that balance sits in terms of potential harm to open countryside against the benefits of the delivery of affordable housing? I don't think there are any other standout issues. I know there's been discussions about play space, but ultimately it complies with our planning policies on play space. So we wouldn't actually be able to argue that on appeal, even if we feel a better scheme would involve play space, because it complies with our planning policies. The sort of policy tension here is between delivery of affordable housing and impact on open countryside. But I'd also encourage members to consider their views on this particular piece of open countryside in terms of how important it is in terms of the character of the settlement and its intrinsic value in effect. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify on the procedural side of it for you, Councillor, we haven't yet got to the debate side of matters. We've done questions and discussions with speakers and questions to officers. As if members, as the debate progresses, do wish to put an alternative motion to that before the committee this evening in the officer report, that's absolutely, following process, that's fine. That would then need to follow the standard process for the motion and be voted on accordingly. If the conclusion of members from the debate is a recommendation for refusal against the officer recommendation for grant, and then therefore the matter is then refused, then the applicant would have an opportunity, if they see fit, to submit an appeal. The likelihood of success, as James has said, would be a matter for the inspector as and when it went to an appeal for consideration. And there would be the key matters that have been highlighted in the officer report, and so far the questions and comments that have been made and matters that come through the debate would feed into that appeal process at that time. Does that assist?
Thank you. Is it a question to officers on what you've heard so
It
far?
was probably more of a statement. I appreciate from a question, but I think the question by our colleague councillor is inappropriate, because we should not be in a situation of determining what, if this went to appeal, what the inspector would actually determine. I think it's very important that we get to that stage where we should not anticipate what the inspector would actually decide.
Yeah, quite so. So any further questions to members on what you've heard so far? Councillor Bambridge.
Yeah, we've heard a lot about the supposed or recorded demand is. Can you tell us exactly what the numbers are for those people who have definitely got a request for Old Stratford? There seemed to be a lot of confusion as to where these numbers and things come from. But the gentleman who spoke earlier gave a figure, and I'd like to know if that is evidence that we can rely on to take into account.
So the figure for people on the housing register who would be willing to live in Old Stratford is 60 as of June 2023.
Are those people ones, it is their primary wish, or it is one of a number of places that have been proposed?
I'm afraid we don't know the answer to that question.
I just bring it up because I know some people give a list of places they'd be happy to live in, and they usually have a priority one, which would be significant, I think, in this case, if we knew that.
Yeah. Okay. Any further questions to the officers? Councillor Sharps.
Yes, earlier one of our speakers made reference to R1 in the local plan. I'm afraid I don't know what R1 is, and normally I do have the local plan with me, but I don't tonight. So if we could hear what that is, please, I'd be very grateful.
Mr. Patterson.
Thank you, Chair. So R1's outlined in paragraph 7.3. But the policy basically sets out the rural spatial strategy in the rural areas of the joint core strategy area, which is now West Northants. It's relevant to this application because it sets out what the criteria are. So the analysis is in 7.16. So specifically, we're looking at R1G. That sets out the exceptional circumstances that would justify development outside the confines of a settlement. So I list the exceptions there, which are the reuse of an existing building, whether it would enhance and maintain the vitality of rural communities or would contribute and improve the local economy, as well as securing appropriate financial contributions. So yeah, that's what R1 is. It's more of a high level policy than the policies in the local plan part 2, which are specific to the South Northamptonshire area.
Thank you very much. Any further questions to the officers on what you've heard so far? Okay, I'll move to the debate then. Are you ready, councillor Sharps?
I personally believe that this should have been mentioned in the summing up by the officers at the beginning. There we are.
Thank you. Moving to the debate. Who would like to go first? Councillor Parker.
I'll start the ball rolling, Chair,
Yeah, please.
if I may. R1, which is what councillors referred to, it doesn't meet R1 at all. So it's outside the village confines. So it's not there. H3, you do need to have a housing needs survey for H3, as the officer pointed out on page 24. The absence of a local housing needs survey means that the proposal as submitted does not comply with this requirement of policy H3. So that's written there. That's what the officer said. So there's two things there which are against policy, nothing else. So that's what I would say on that. As the question I'd ask the officer, I don't know if actually he'll know, so apologies if you don't. The shared ownership. My belief is if you actually put a sum of money into a shared ownership house, at some points, you can actually buy that house. That's why it's shared ownership. Is there a point in time on that timeline when it goes from, dare I say it, affordable to actually owning the house?
So I don't know all of the details of that particular product in terms of, you know, how much you have to put in, etc. But the entry-level exception site exception requires the affordable homes to be affordable in perpetuity. So we'd have a section 106 agreement, which would prevent them being sold privately and falling into market housing. So I'm not, you know, expert on the shared ownership mechanisms, but we would have contingencies in place to stop them falling outside of the definition of affordable.
It just seems strange that shared ownership, from what I know, people I know have gone into them, have put a sum of money in, and later they can buy them. It's like, well, why would you do that if you can just move into a rented accommodation? I don't understand it, but I take your point and thank you for clarifying it.
All right. Any other views on this application before us? Councillor Barter.
Yes, I'm very torn on this one, and just in case anyone's going to say predetermination, I don't think I know even now how I'm going to vote, which is probably as it should be. But if this were a market application, a normal application, outside village confines and not required for land supply, our previous decisions indicate we would probably refuse it. It's the fact of being affordable that makes it possible to consider it as an exception. And that depends on the needs, whether they're formally assessed or not, or how local those needs need to be to justify an exception. Council-wide, previous district-wide, parish-wide, or what? And I still feel unclear on that latter point as to how local needs need to be to justify an exception. I don't think I'm asking you, well, unless anyone can answer that, it's not really a question, it's just my position.
I mean, going back to the start of the debate, the slight difficulty is that the policies don't require in this case, the applicant to effectively liaise with the parish and do a housing needs survey. the council's affordable housing officer considers that this development would be of great benefit in meeting local housing need. I appreciate as soon as you say the word local, we'll be getting into debate about what is local. We've tried to, as officers, in the report, provide members with as many statistics as we can. Appreciate that may partly cause confusion in itself, but we've tried to give as much information as we can to the committee. We feel that it would meet that the applicant's agent was asked a question of are all these houses likely to be occupied? All the advice we're receiving as officers from our housing team is that that it would meet a demand. So ultimately, I feel this is a decision for members of the balance between the benefit, that there is a benefit of affordable housing here, and any harm that you perceive to be occurring in terms of the housing being on open countryside. In your officer's view, we put a lot of weighting on the delivery of affordable housing, because although in South Northampton there's a lot of market housing that has been delivered, there hasn't been so much affordable housing. And that is what all the statistics say.
Councillor Bagot-Webb.
Thank you, Chair. Before my colleague spoke, I'd already written down, this seems to fall across two policies of R1 and H3. If you look at the confines, if we've got policies set, we should go with the policies. But there's always the exception that's also written into the policy. So the policy here is saying you don't go outside the village confines or the settlement confines unless there's an exception. And one of the exceptions that's allowed is if you can demonstrate the need, which then comes back to H3. And in my view, H3 is not proven. So we've got two policies that are clearly not being met. My view is going towards the fact we should not be breaking policies. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on that then? Councillor Pritchard.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to be very basic with regards to, and I've read all the reports. Can I just actually say this, that with regards to, I personally don't see this as an exception site, and it doesn't address the local population with regards to housing needs. It's in open countryside and it's outside the village confines. We have 8.65 years of land supply. And when you look at the Integrated Care Board at Luton and MK, it states on here, with regards to east of the Meadows, Old Stratford practices in the local area are already at the limit of their capacity, and an increase of population could push practices to the point that they are no longer viable to accept new patients. You're also looking at the situation with regards to flooding. And once again, the Milton Keynes City Council have come up with, and I appreciate that it says they initially objected to it, but their applications are now saying that they approve it. However, they still raise some concerns in relation to the long-term storage calculations. So that says to me, okay, in the short term, but in the long term, there could be a particular problem. And also, of course, you've got the security issues, you know, that have been highlighted. And it's when you look at, you were talking about the surgeries in Old Stratford, you've got most of the people in this particular area go into Old Stratford, which comes under MK. We actually have got, should we say, in the area of the practices in Old Stratford, or sorry, Stony Stratford, you have a situation there where we have been waiting for nearly 9 years now to spend £100,000 worth of 106 money for the Black Horse Drive development that is in Old Stratford. So once again, we see that these particular potential residents in this particular area will not get the sort of healthcare that they actually require. Also, when you look at the bus services, if I remember correctly, that the bus services going into Milton Keynes, I think about 1 an hour. You know, well, it's not 1 an hour, it's probably 1 a day or 2 a day. And also there is no services into Towcester or Northampton. So communications there is very bad indeed. When you talk about the situation with regards to the play areas, and one of our colleagues, or should we say the agent, stated that there was a play area across the Deans Hanger Road. When you look at what the busy road that is, trying to get children to cross from this development into the other area there could be very, very dangerous indeed. So therefore, I thought I would state those particular points so that anybody else can actually have discussion on those areas.
Okay, who's next?
Just sorry, just a summary, infrastructure really. I think the balance between infrastructure setup and capability versus the actual need for what's been said, because we as an authority haven't met those numbers. And I think that's quite clear in terms of that affordable target. That's been quite clear for a few years, versus is that area able to serve the amount of people, and that is going to get basically the NHS impact that is quite compelling, because you're going to have an additional number of families requiring additional numbers of everything there. The access road to Towcester, that was quite compelling. That we 10 miles away, 11, I don't know how many miles away we are, but you've got to look at what's going to service those people in that environment, what jobs are going to service those people in that environment. The bus route into Northampton, you know, speaking from from a perspective of locality and jobs, where are those jobs going to come from? How are they going to get to those jobs as well? That's a real concern of mine. And you know, I've been quite clear of my infrastructure. If you're going to build something like this, it's got to be made for the people that are going to serve it. And I'm quite disappointed in terms of the facilities for children as well. I think that's an overriding, although not legally bound to do something, I think it would have been pleasant to see a thought of and a provision for, particularly when you add, you know, what I've discussed there, to balance that out, because there is a need here, and I do appreciate that.
Thank you, Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know if this helps, but I would actually go against officer's advice, and that is a proposal. It's against R1, impact on the open countryside in H3. They're two policies, very clear. So that would be my proposal, to go against officer's advice. I don't know if I've got a seconder for that.
Thank you. Councillor Clubley.
Yes, you know, I am concerned that this is outside the confines of the village. I don't think in this, knowing Old Stratford very well, I don't think that there is a need for this type of housing in that location. I also causes me great concern that it's encroaching on the character of Old Stratford and the Ouse Valley Park, and I would second Councillor Parker's.
Thank you very much. Any other views on that? Councillor Bambridge?
Yeah, I would agree totally with what's just been said. And looking again at the wording of the previous appeal, the words that the inspector said was, "I consider therefore that the proposal would harm the character and appearance of the rural surroundings, and therefore conflicting with the national local policy objectives of protecting the countryside's quality and character," sum that up pretty well. And I would think that those words maybe could be incorporated in the proposal.
Thank you very much. Mr. Roger, on what you've heard so far.
Sorry. We obviously, as a motion that's being put forward, if members were minded to refuse the application, the only point that would cause us particular concern as officers would be the reference to policy H3, not R1, because we think that the application meets the criteria for an entry level exception. And as such, does not need to be considered under the rural exception policies. This is set out in paragraph 7.15. So I think where we have a difference of opinion is that interpretation of policy H3. Clearly, there is previous refusals on this site concerning harm to open countryside. So it's the reference to policy H3 that would cause me particular concern.
Okay, well, we have an officer's recommendation before us. Does anyone support it?
I support what the officer's saying because obviously he knows more than most certainly what I do. It just seems strange that in the report, and I've read it out once, I'll do it again, the absence of a local housing needs survey means the proposal as submitted does not comply with this requirement of policy H3. And it just seems strange that it's printed there for everybody to see. And now we're saying we're just rowing back from that. But if the officer's saying that R1 is stronger with the other additions that Councillor Dermot Bambridge has said as well, then I'd be happy to go with that.
Okay, officers, what do you make of that?
James has some comment there.
Oh, sorry.
Mr.
Patterson.
Yeah, so I think paragraph the councillor's referring to is 7.15. I think it might be worth me just reading out the first 2 or 3 sentences. I think the issue is I'm aware of previous decisions for entry-level exception and also representation relating to H3. So I included reference to H3 in order to set out why it's not relevant here. So 7.15 says it should be noted that development should be considered as either an entry-level exception or a rural exception site. Policy H3, so I'm deviating from the text here. Policy H3 is about rural exception sites. Policy LH3 is about entry-level exception sites. So returning to the text, since the application meets the criteria for an entry-level exception and complies with the relevant policies, the proposal does not need to also be considered under the rural exception policies. However, in the interest of fullness and having noted public representation raising concern about potential demand for such housing, and a comment from the planning policy team which erroneously refers to the site as a rural exception, officers note that the proposal would also have been acceptable as a rural exception. So the point I'm making is that it's not a rural exception site, it's an entry-level exception site, and therefore it doesn't need to be tested against policy H3, it's tested against policy LH3 and paragraph 72 of the NPPF. In the interest of fullness, and because it came up a lot in the public consultation and has been subject to debate in previous applications, I also included reference to policy H3, basically setting out why we're not testing it against policy H3, which is obviously why Mr. Roger has suggested there's no basis for using policy H3 and a reason for refusal. So I hope that provides some clarification.
In that case, Chair, then I'd go with the officer Roger on that one and go for the R1 and the impact on the countryside. So, and picking up the points that Councillor Bambridge said. So I take the H3 out, although I'm still slightly confused with what you just said, but I'll listen to you most certainly.
Councillor Bambridge.
Yeah, it was just to come in to say whether our legal representative here tonight has any comment to make regarding those comments made, if she's. Yeah. Are you
Thank you,
coming in
Chair.
here?
They are, you know, that the matters that you've just been discussing are technical planning related policy matters. They're not a legal issue in terms of the advice you've received from the planning officer. The legal issue would be how you then, if you were minded as members to proceed through to the motion for a refusal to a resolution to refuse, subject contrary to the officer recommendation. But I don't think we've quite reached a decision point on that point at the moment.
Yeah, so we have a recommendation before us for an approval. Would anyone have supported that? Well, yeah, nobody's supporting the officer's recommendation for an approval. Is that
I
so?
don't think that's the motion, Chair. I put forward a motion rejecting the officer's advice.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to find out whether there is even one person here that would support the officer's recommendation.
I accept that, Chair, but that's not what I said.
Mr. Roger, where do we go from here? Do you want to vote on this?
Yeah, so effectively, the advice I was giving to members is the officers had a concern regarding use of the reference to H3 as we have discussed. But historically, applications have been refused regarding the harm of encroaching open countryside on this site. So it's not that officers couldn't defend that at appeal, which I think was perhaps being alluded to. So it would then, I think the next step would be members to perhaps quantify slightly further the exact harm that's being caused. I can assist members with that if they would wish, but in terms of is it the well, are there any further thoughts perhaps the members want to expand on before I comment further?
Well, Councillor Pritchard gave us a list of things, didn't he?
No, point of order, Chair. We've already got a proposal on the table, which has been modified slightly by taking out the H3.
Yeah.
My colleague here has said R1. Surely, as we have it, I believe seconded, we take it to a vote. That then becomes a substantive if win, and the other one drops.
Mr. Roger?
Yeah, so I just want to clarify, in terms of a detailed refusal reason, do members wish to delegate the final wording to officers? Obviously, I understand the motion being put forward that it's the harm to open countryside or developing outside of the settlement boundary. That is the matter of concern to members, particular reference to policy R1, which concerns developing an open countryside. Is that the motion being put forward?
Yeah, I mean, that would be good. And that motion there, it would be good also if the chair and the vice chair saw that exact wording, so they can reflect on what the people have said around this table. But I accept what you're saying, James.
Ms. Hall.
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify to members, once a motion is proposed and before you go to any formal vote on a motion or an officer recommendation, particularly with information where members are considering a refusal and against recommendation, then members are required to provide reasons and as detailed as possible. I appreciate the finalised wording can be crafted and assisted by officers, but it does need to come from members in the first instance based on the discussions that have gone through this evening's debate. Those reasons need to be as substantive as you can make those. As I've got it at the moment, we have R1 and development in the open countryside and harm to the open countryside. If there's anything else that members wish to include in that needs to go forward and before it is voted on. Thank you.
Councillor Bambridge.
Yeah, one of the things, mentioned it before and several other people have, is this actual proof of the local need. And by local need, I don't mean in West Northamptonshire or South Northampton as such. It's specific local need relevant to the village of Old Stratford. And I would feel that we could add that there's insufficient proof of local requirement or need, whatever the word would be best chosen, for this site.
Thank you. Any other views? Councillor Sharps?
I would like councillors to consider taking Officer Rogers up on his offer to help us make our amendment and proposal stronger through our observations.
Mr. Roger?
Well, what I would firstly say is obviously for the public record, the officers were recommending approval of the application, but nonetheless, part of my role is to come prepared in case there is an overturn. So I will read out a possible reason to members. The location of the proposed development by reason of its siting outside of the settlement confines of Old Stratford falls within the open countryside and does not meet the exceptions in policies R1 and S1. S1 is interconnected of the development plan where residential development would be supported outside the settlement confines. The proposed development has therefore not been adequately justified and represents an unsustainable form of development which would result in a harmful encroachment into open countryside and fail to preserve the character and appearance of the area. So that hopefully encapsulates some of the concerns members were raising about justification and whether it's a sustainable form of development, but trying to avoid getting drawn into policies that might cause us difficulty at appeal. And that this conflict is not outweighed by any material planning consideration. And then officers would then outline what they consider to be other further relevant planning policies in both the Joint Core Strategy and South Northamptonshire Local Plan.
Thank you. Councillor Sharps?
I'd like to propose those amendments be added to the original proposal.
Thank you. Anyone second that? Councillor Parker? Thank you. Are we ready to vote? Or Chair? Yeah. Mr. Woods?
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, we've had that from Councillor Sharps, and we had a proposal that was proposed by Councillor Parker and seconded by Councillor Clubley initially. So do the proposer and the seconder accept those suggestions from Councillor Sharps rather than changing who the proposer and seconder are? Could we have confirmation effectively from the proposer and the seconder that you accept those changes that were suggested?
Yeah, thank you for that. Happy to accept those proposals.
Councillor Clubley?
I'm happy to accept those proposals.
Thank you. All those in favour then, please show. Yes. Yes, we're voting on the proposal. Yes, right. Yeah,
Can
to
you read it
refuse.
as normal by this? Could we just have it read out, please?
Thank you, Chair. So it's proposed by Councillor Kevin Parker and seconded rather by Councillor Maggie Clubley that this application be refused contrary to officer recommendations as the proposed application contradicts policies R1 and S1 of the local plan. As the site is outside the village confines, there is insufficient evidence to adequately justify the development due to the harms caused to the open countryside and obviously the suggestions incorporated by Mr. Roger and Councillor Sharps. Final wording will also be included in the minutes, of course. Thank you, Chair.
All those in favour, please show. Those against? Any abstentions? Well, thank you very much. We'll have a short break for 5 minutes. Item 7, Aston Martin F1, Buckingham Road, Silverstone. Mr. Patterson.
Thank you, Chair. This application relates to a parcel of land within the wider Aston Martin F1 site, which is accessed via Dadford Road, as shown outlined in red. The site is an open countryside as it lies outside the confines of any defined settlement, although the site is surrounded by numerous other commercial units to the west and south, including the buildings comprising the rest of the Aston Martin site. It should be noted that the wind tunnel was originally proposed on the site. However, this has since been amended, with the wind tunnel being under construction to the east of the application site. The application proposes the erection of a single large commercial building for R&D purposes relating to the Aston Martin team. So let's go through. In fact, we've got something fairly exciting. So I did take some photos of the site, but it's currently a building site, so it's quite difficult to see what's going on. So I was sent a 360-degree photo from a drone. So this was taken. Let me just get my bearings. Okay, so the Aston Martin HQ building is there, and you've got Silverstone off in the distance. So this is building 2 under construction here, which houses, whoops, okay, and we're back, which houses the admin and events. And then you've got the wind tunnel under construction here. So the application site refers to this parcel of land here. I don't know if you can see my cursor. Sorry, there's a bit of a delay. So it refers to broadly this parcel of land here. You can see you've got the ancient woodlands beyond, and then the landscaping would be encompassed in this area. And then you've got some commercial and I believe residential uses there, and then the Silverstone Rally School there. So hopefully that assists members in getting their bearing. Just included the photos in case the link didn't work, but it did. So this is the proposed arrangement as shown on the site plan. So you've got building 4 with car parking to the south, in line with the rest of the buildings that comprise the wider site, and then landscaping to the north. So I'll whiz through these. So you've got ground floor, proposed mezzanine floor, proposed roof, proposed section, proposed north and east elevations, proposed south and west elevations. And then this is where the building sits in the wider master plan. So the footage we had was from above the building site of building 2. Building 1 is the HQ, which has been constructed. I think it was finished in May last year, if memory serves. Building 3 is the wind tunnel, which is currently under construction. And then this is the proposed building, which is currently used for, part of it's been cleared and part of it is used for storage of construction material, offices and traffic. You can see it will use the existing access here that serves the Aston Martin site. This is an aerial plan showing the context of the site. So obviously at the moment you can see it has building works going on. This is a committee plan which shows the constraints of the site, which is just that it's near ancient woodland and is within the special landscape area. Planning officers, for the reasons set out in the officer report, recommend that the application is approved subject to the recommended conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. There's no speakers on this. So, Councillor Banbridge.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, there'd be no local objections per se, but there is just one thing I'd like to bring up. And if we could go back to the master plan picture, which was, I think, preceding that one there. That's it. Is to do with the entrance. Part of the planning application is for an increased number of parking spaces, and which will mean obviously more traffic going in at the top, that little red shape almost at the top there on the right-hand side. That's on one side of the dual carriageway. That is the Dadford Road that goes between Silverstone and eventually Buckingham. If you see just above that, where the green bit goes, there is a lane there. That's it there being shown directly under the green lane. That feeds up to Lichlake Farm, which you can just see in the picture there, and a bit further down Lichlake Barns. And where about the MA of master plan is the Silverstone Rally School. There's already been one serious-ish accident at the entrance to the site, which was caused by the proximity between those two entrances. Bear in mind also that site is serving about, I think it's 600 parking spaces, something like that. It's a large number anyway. The number's almost irrelevant in that respect. And the hill where that road goes, it goes up to a sort of peak of a hill, and the peak being about a third of the way up from the bottom, where you can see the road from the right coming in, and it's over the top. Cars coming up that dual carriageway or vehicles suddenly come up, and then there'll be vehicles slowing to go in there. And the churning to the rally school, etc., are literally about 30 meters in front. And it is that proximity that's been the problem, because people misjudging the distances and sudden braking. You can see the skid marks in the road. As a result, there's been a report put together and recommendations made to modify the entrance, and some's already been done. The hedge has been taken back to give a better view, and there's new signposting being done. Now, I'm not sure where that forms within the planning at the moment, and I'm sure the planning officer can explain that to us. But what I would say that the serious objections raised and concerns will be placated completely by the full application of the findings of that report by a traffic expert. And I would just like to propose that if the item is proposed for approval by the committee, that is part of the requirement for it, which it may well be, but I just wanted to clarify that point. But otherwise, no, it's well regarded by the local community, who are very proud to have Aston Martin as part of the village. Thank you.
Mr. Patterson?
Thank you, Chair. So I suppose it's just to reiterate the comments from Councillor Bambridge. Obviously, we've had correspondence with people who've had concerns in terms of the safety of the road, obviously following an accident as well. And as I understand it, the full road safety audit's been undertaken. And I think in my paragraph 7, excuse me, I'll find the paragraph shortly, but it's addressed in the report. Oh, there we go, 7.46. It made various recommendations, as the member outlined, including trimming hedges and installing signage. So highways officers didn't feel that these issues would have been a constraint on approving this application anyway, but obviously Aston Martin have since, following the road safety audit, have agreed to undertake those works. So if members felt it was appropriate, I don't see any reason why we couldn't have a condition just confirming as part of this application, given that this application affects the main access, that before the building is brought into use, that they will have complied with the requirements of the road safety audit. I don't think there'd be any objection from officers on that.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Mr. Rayner?
we'd have to be careful with the wording, that we're not sort of causing conflict between highways and planning. But yeah, to my understanding is the road safety audit process is very advanced, as basically described in detail by Councillor Bambridge. But what James and I were sort of whispering is that That said, I do think we could word a condition that's a kind of bolt and braces that just basically ensures that, as James explained, that there isn't occupation of this building until if we cross-reference the relevant highway safety works, that they're all completed, maintained thereafter, etc. So I can see how we could word a condition that, as I say, is a sort of bolt and braces.
Chair, they may actually have been done. I was up there the other day, but I didn't have the document in my hand, but certainly they are being done. So
Yeah. So what we would also do through such a condition is basically, I wouldn't say withdraw permitted development rights, but basically try and ensure that there aren't any subsequent sort of, that the applicant doesn't do any changes that effectively unravel what's been agreed to the highway safety audit, because it's actually a quite important piece of, sorry, this road safety audit was quite important. And I totally understand why Councillor Bambridge is mentioning it, and I've personally been CC'd over the past sort of 6 months to various sort of correspondence that are interrelated to this road safety audit.
yeah, it's partly highways from the point of view of signage, and I'm not sure if there's any road markings, but also they've modified the main entrance slightly to adopt all these things. So it is actually part of the site that is affected by it.
So in a way, it is happening anyway, but as I say, we could
The belt and braces
we could
would
do a
be
sort
helpful,
of
wouldn't it?
belt and braces condition so that, dare I say it, so the left and right hand are interconnected.
Yeah, okay. Councillor Sharps, were you coming in? No? Okay. Any other views on this? We have a recommendation that's been modified with the additional condition that we discussed.
Delegated to officers.
Delegated to officers. Yes, all those in favour, please show. Before we do that, a proposer, David Bambridge, seconder, Mr. Parker. Thank you. All those in favour? Unanimous. Thank you very much. Now we have item 8, land off Mill Lane, Brackley.
So just be a minute doing the changeover.
Yeah. Mr. Burton.
Thank you. So this application relates to a parcel of land to the eastern side of Brackley Town. The land appears to be vacant, but does benefit from a lawful use as a timber storage yard and consists of hard standing with vegetation to the southern tip. The site borders the Great River Ouse to the east and woodland, and to the west residential properties. The scheme initially consisted of 32 floodlights and 12 CCTV cameras. However, the scheme before us today consists of 4 CCTV cameras and 3 floodlights. So these are just some photos of the site. So this is the access point. This is from the access down towards the southern tip of the site. This is the northern boundary of the site, with an example of one of the poles posed. That is the western boundary of the site where the residential properties are. And that is another angle of the same boundary. And again, that is the western boundary towards the residents. And that's the southern tip. And that's the eastern side towards the river and the woodland. So this is the proposed site plan with the elevations to the right-hand side. As you can see, the poles to house the floodlights and cameras would be to the perimeter of the site. Importantly, the floodlights would be to the eastern side, next to the river. This is just a plan of the lux measurements of the lights. So the residents are to the far side of the picture on the left, where the darker element is displayed. And the lux, as you can see, is most highly concentrated immediately below the floodlights. And then the image on the right just converts those lux measurements to figures, numerical figures. So this is the specifications of the light. As you can see, they have shields to the rear of them to prevent any spillage onto the river corridor and woodland, in the interests of safeguarding protected species. And on the right, it is just sensor details for the lights, which will be on triggered sensors. So this is just an aerial plan of the site. And that is the constraints map, which is flood zone 2 and 3. So ultimately, officers consider the principle of these security measures to a commercial site to be acceptable. Main issues being impacts on residents and the wildlife and protected species to the east. Advice received confirms that the lighting would not cause nuisance to the residents to the west, and that is from the council's environmental health officer. Whilst the CCTV could be conditioned to ensure it would not overlook the properties. And finally, the council's ecologist is content that there would be no significant harm to the protected species or the wildlife to the east, providing the recommendations within the ecological report are followed. Therefore, officers recommend approval subject to conditions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we have John Staples, a local resident, to speak to us, an objector. So if you come to the microphone, please.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak. I reside directly facing the proposed plan. I would like to raise objection to the proposed planning application due to several concerns. Firstly, the land in question currently holds permission for the storage of timber from previous commercial use. However, a formal report conducted as part of the planning process for housing clearly concludes that there is no viable commercial or business use for the land. The application continues to mention permission has been granted for a wood processing plant. Furthermore, the proposal advocates the installation of CCTV cameras without outlining any concrete plan for their monitoring. The suggested response to potential issues relies on monitoring, neglecting to specify how this surveillance will be managed in a timely manner. This lack of clarity raises significant concerns about the efficiency, practicality of the proposed security measures. Additionally, the inclusion of lights on the site lacks justification, as there seems to be no necessity for continuous monitoring. These lights pose a direct threat of light pollution to the surrounding environment and communities. As a resident directly impacted by these proposed changes, I firmly believe that the incident but also adds an unnecessary element of disturbance to the neighbourhood. In conclusion, I strongly object to the proposed planning application on the grounds that it lacks clarity on monitoring processes and disregards the potential environmental impact. I urge the planning authorities to reject this proposal in alignment with concerns highlighted. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we have Andrew Parr, local resident, to speak to us as an objector.
According to the applicant, the justification for lighting and CCTV is in response to security issues on the site. However, the crime prevention officer confirms there have been no reported incidents relating to crime or disorder. It is also noted by the CPO that the CCTV to be of use in reducing crime and antisocial behaviour, it must be monitored and responded to in a timely manner. No details of monitoring or response protocols have been provided by the applicant, which calls into question the effectivity of the proposed CCTV. It is acknowledged that the current permission in place via CLU allows for storage of timber supplies on the site. The nature of both the original and revised applications to add CCTV and lighting to a site which already benefits from secure gated access and perimeter fencing brings into question the type of timber supplies which warrant such a high level of security. Section 6 of the planning statement by Canaan Town Planning, which formed part of the approved application for the 7 residential dwellings, states that the site is undesirable for continued use as a timber merchant, nor any other form of commercial or industrial use. This raises questions around the validity of the existing CLU and use case suggested by the applicant to require remote monitoring of a site which is currently and has been vacant for a number of years. Section 7.7 and 7.8 of the Planning Committee report suggests that the proposed lighting will not adversely impact the neighbourhood residential dwellings due to positioning and design. This conclusion does not consider that the site adjacent to residential area which does not have any form of permanent lighting. The high-level lighting proposed will have an intrusive impact on the neighbouring dwellings, which is amplified by the complete and total darkness of the area in which they are proposed to be installed. The sensor functionality of the lighting adds to this intrusive impact. This is evident from the lights which were already installed without prior permission, which were repeatedly activated throughout the night by wildlife movement and adverse weather. This has resulted in nuisance of light pollution for residents. Section 7.18 of the Planning Committee report details how the applicant has provided supporting evidence of low-level antisocial behaviour to the council to justify the lighting and CCTV. The report fails to mention the threatening correspondence and verbal abuse the applicant has subjected upon residents. The fact that work to date on the site has been carried out without prior permission and during weekends and holiday periods where there are no means for reporting to or response by the council is also missing from the report. My request is that the committee move to reject this application in light of all the points raised. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Local ward member, councillor Bagot-Wedd, please.
Thank you.
Yeah, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening. As local ward member for Brackley, I'd like to put some context around the area associated with the planning application this evening. This field was part of a larger area of land originally occupied by the Hawkins Salmon Timber Yard, who cut and sold wood and related tools. This site was made up in part of the larger site containing a retail shop, timber storage yard, timber cutting and preparation workshop. An ancillary field and paddock became an extra storage area as the business grew, but did not have planning permission for timber storage until 2009, when the certificate of lawful use was granted by South North Hants Council. This certificate was issued on the basis that the site had been used for this purpose for more than 10 years. The storage classification of sui generis uses was given to the specifically limit the use of to only the storage of timber. This planning permission still exists today. As the whole of the Hawkins Salmon site was assessed through a residential site, then strict working hours covering Monday to Friday were applied, but the ancillary field was slightly less restricted, enabling timber to be purchased on Saturday mornings. Hawkins and Salmon ceased trading more than 10 years ago, and in 2020, planning permission was granted for the construction of 7 dwellings. Plans for a further 6 dwellings to be built on the ancillary field were eventually withdrawn due to the ancillary field being designated a floodplain. Since the adjacent properties have been built, the ancillary field comprises now only of a hard standing and has remained unused. This application seeks permission to install 3 floodlights and 4 cameras. The question being asked by the local residents is why? Why does an unused field need such a high level of security? The officer's report states 32 floodlights and 12 CCTV cameras were originally requested, but the officer negotiated this down to 3 floodlights and 4 cameras. The field is not being used and is directly alongside the new residential area and bounded on the other side by open fields. These floodlights and cameras are apparently required for the security of an empty field and to stop vandalism. The police report in the officer's report states there's no need for this security on an unused field. And furthermore, they state there's been no reports of damage or vandalism reported to them. There have been 24 letters of objection to the application from local residents, some of whom have
Thank
been...
you, Councillor Bagot. Your time is up.
Thank you.
Now I call Louise Steele, the agent for the applicant.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Louise Steele. I'm from Frampton's Town Planning and I'm speaking as agent in support of the planning application. My client is grateful for the officer's recommendation for approval, particularly in light of ongoing antisocial behaviour at the site. Incidents at the site have included altering the road sign at the front of the site from saying no obstruction, strictly no parking, to no destruction, strictly no farting. Tyres have been slashed and parking has happened, obstructing the entrance to the site. Photographic evidence of this has been sent to the case officer. Whilst admittedly, this is relatively low level antisocial behaviour, it is in my client's interest to make the site as safe as possible to stop this escalating, and there is concern about the safety of people potentially trespassing onto the site. Unless the site is made safe, further damage could be expected. There were previously floodlights on the site in a much greater number when the established timber merchant use was on the site. These lights were vandalised. My client is currently looking at options for developing the site, but in the meantime needs to keep the site tidy, safe and secure. It is also noted that an adjacent property to the north, that a CCTV camera has been mounted on a large pole which also overlooks the site. This suggests that the adjacent property may also have concerns about security in the area. I note from the officer's report that there are no objections to the proposal from the following consultees: the council's policy officer, the Environment Agency, the council's environmental protection officer, the council's ecology officer, the Wildlife Trust, the police crime prevention officer and Highways England. This is a brownfield site in an urban area located next to or near to a dual carriageway. The officers have worked very hard with us to get the right scheme for the site and have asked us to substantially and fairly reduce the number of proposed cameras and lights at the site, which we have done. The proposals are in accordance with the council's adopted planning policy, and I therefore respectfully request that the application is approved in line with the officer's recommendation. Just in relation to the comment that was raised in relation to monitoring, it could be that you are minded to approve it. We could look at a condition that could be attached to the planning permission to confirm a monitoring regime for the CCTV. Thank you.
Very much. If you remain there in case of questions from members, are there any questions for Ms Steele? Councillor Clubley.
Mine's quite a basic question, actually, because I'm sitting here and I've watched the planning officer's presentation. And I'm not too sure what you're trying to secure, because we've seen an empty patch of land.
It is an empty patch of land. As I said, they are looking at potential options in the future. I don't know what those options are, but there have been incidents on the site, as we've listed in my speech. So that's the issue. That's why there's been need for security. There was need for security with the previous timber storage on the site as well.
Thank you. Councillor Pritchard.
Thank you, Chair. With regards to the CCTV, where is the storage of these activities going to be held, and how long will they be kept for?
Yeah, I'm not sure, and that's why I'm suggesting the condition to clarify that. I assume, and I'm going to make it, if there is an incident, they must be recorded somewhere in cyberspace, and then it's basically downloaded if there is an incident, so it can be seen. But I'm not 100% sure on how that monitoring regime works, and I think that's a fair question that's been raised.
As my colleague over there stated, it seems to be, you know, an enormous overkill to have these cameras and, you know, the light in there just to oversee a obviously vacant space. I appreciate from a Frampton's point of view that you're probably going to develop it in the not too distant future. But having said that, you know, in the initial stage, you know, it seems to be very much an overkill.
I think for the same reason, there's a camera to the north, that there have been incidents is there, you know, that camera is not within my client's site. There is a need for security and safety on the site, and that's the reason why they've requested it on this site.
Councillor Bambridge.
Yeah, the lights, will they be on all the time during night time, or are they motion sensitive?
No, they are motion sensitive. So they do come on if something moves. Again, I note the residents' concern about them flickering on and off. I think that sensitivity can be altered, but that again is something that could be looked at via a condition.
And are they independently, or do all three? Is it three of them? They all come on
I
together.
understand it's independently.
Okay, I think that was all I wanted to ask.
Yeah. Thank you. Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was sort of taken aback with, we've started with 32 light poles and then 12 with cameras. And then through the officer, we've dropped to 3 floodlights and 4 cameras. So we've seemed to drop dramatically from what you were proposing initially. I mean, that would have been a fairly light area, I would have said. The other one which I don't understand is with the floodlights, why don't you just put infrared in, which has moved on quite substantially these days. You don't need lights with infrared, so you can camera it without any problems at all. And obviously people know they do it for wildlife all the time. So why not infrared?
I think that my clients just traditionally preferred a floodlight type option, and I think they just feel it's more effective from a security point of view, but that's what they want to look at on this side.
Yeah, it just seems a bit, dare I say it, old fashioned, because if you're trying to catch somebody, infrared will pick it up. You don't need the lights to come on at all. So I'm assuming that's what you want to do. But anyway, that's for the other members of the committee to decide. Thank you, though.
Are there any further questions? Councillor Sharps.
I'm just trying to work out, is this a deterrent or monitoring?
To be honest, I think it's both.
Okay, then the second question is, you've mentioned that there used to be a large amount of timber on this property. There isn't a large amount of timber, so we can't be monitoring and protecting a large amount of anything because the only thing there is concrete.
No, it is a vacant site, but as you said, there have been these incidences like the altering of the road sign in front of it, the parking, the slashing, and there have been incidents, but yeah, at the moment it is just a brownfield, hard standing site.
Yeah. So there's been
But-
minor incidences, and we went for the 32. From the point of view of consideration of neighbours, consideration of the rural idyll, and the fact that every single animal I know scurries. So from my point of view, just thinking about this, with a light that will flick on and flick off, you're basically making one end of a town a disco.
Is there a
Is that
question?
correct?
Is there a question?
It is a question. Is that correct?
I don't believe that's correct, and you know, whether take the point where the resident said whether we could look at altering the sensitivity if it is becoming that sensitive, or it becomes that sensitivity for the lights, but yeah.
Will it, well, I have another question. Will it cut off? So if you are talking about sensitivity, will there be anybody from the point of view of monitoring it, going there to check on it, or is it just there for being their sake? So if it put them up and you have them flicking on and off all the way through the night, nobody is going there to monitor the site. Is the site really there? Are you really monitoring it for its own safety, or are you just putting lights up for the sake of it?
No, I think it's a monitoring and a deterrence issue. So, you know, if there is an incident, somebody will have to go down the site if there is an incident, and that lighting and that the CCTV cameras will enable them to be made aware that there's an incident there.
Okay, and
Yeah.
so as you said, with conditions, we could possibly bring that into the conditions.
Yeah. Thank you.
Councillor Parker.
Yeah, just going back to the incidents you've had, I think you mentioned the signs were being moved and there was some slashing of tyres. But I'm assuming that's outside the boundary.
That did happen outside the boundary. I
So
think
that's
the
not,
boundary of
that's
being
not
fixed.
yours, is it? That's the end of your
No,
curtilage.
it is part of the applicant that's got control of that site as well. So they've got into that. So it's not, they've secured within the site, but that sign for the traffic, for the no parking had been put up by the applicant because they were trying to prevent people from, because they shouldn't be parking in front of the entrance to the site, and that's the thing that got altered. So it's just an example of the kind of incidents that have been happening on the site.
So just for clarity, when the officer showed the gate, that actually isn't the end of your site, it's further out. Is that right?
I would have to double check on the exact ownership.
Yeah, I'm just concerned that some of these things are outside the curtilage of your site, therefore doesn't affect you at all. It might affect the neighbours.
Yeah,
but
and
it
I
doesn't
assume
affect
that's
you.
why they've also put a CCTV camera on a large pole just to the north of the site, because they're concerned about incidents in the area as well. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Barter.
If I understand the officer's report correctly, which is particularly paragraph 718, why you want these lights really isn't our business. Our business is the effect it has on the neighbours. And I don't know what the neighbours would think of this, but it strikes me they might well be less intrusive if they were simply on, like street lights are. It's an urban area and we have lights in urban areas. If it were me, it's the flickering on and off that would annoy me. Is there room to negotiate around that?
It's a discussion I could have with my client, and obviously whether it's, again, it could be dealt with by a condition. I think the sensitive ones were chosen basically to try and reduce any impact on neighbours, but if it's an issue, it could be that it's just a sort of permanently unlit light. A bit like a street light, as you say.
Councillor Pritchard?
Thank you, Chair. Just very quickly, you mentioned the word monitored. So if anybody broke into the site, is there any other means of saying I've entered the site? So presumably what could happen is that somebody could enter the site and in fact you wouldn't know until the following morning.
Yeah, I suspect it will be like your typical doorbell cameras, or you have related linked up to your iPhones, that if there is an incident, it alerts you, and then therefore it will be that kind of mechanism. So I didn't explain myself very clearly before.
Okay, are we done with the questions? Officers, on what you've heard so far?
Yeah, if I can just respond on a few of the points. We have put in the report the comments from the crime prevention officer, residents' comments, but actually our focus as a planning authority was looking at the application and what harm we thought the original proposal was going to cause, which involved a lot of structures, and we thought it would be harmful. So we therefore negotiated with the applicant and reduced the scheme down quite substantially to a point where there was 3 floodlights that, as was shown on the Lux diagram, would have no adverse impact on local residents. And then with respect to the much reduced CCTV, that's facing away from residents, and through a condition, we would ensure that it's not facing towards residents. So effectively, we feel that originally there was a proposal that did cause some harm, but the revisions have resulted in a scheme that causes no harm whatsoever, would be our view. Now, but that said, there's reference to motion sensitivity and the lighting. Just to clarify, my understanding of the lighting proposed is almost like a volume control. You can control the motion sensitivity. So if you want it so sensitive that if a wasp flies by, the light comes on, you can have it very sensitive. If you want it to be less sensitive, you can set it so it's less sensitive. So the point the planning agent was making about that you could in theory have a condition that controlled motion sensitivity, I would concur with that. If members wish that as an additional condition, we could impose a condition that required details, clarification on motion sensitivity. And I would assume that members would wish it to be less sensitive, if I've got that, I've got the mood music correct. It was, as I say, I'm sort of less convinced on adding extra conditions on CCTV, because I think the main thing is that our interest as a planning authority is that it's not affecting people's privacy, and I think we've covered that point. But the point I'd focus members on is the revised proposal causing any harm? And your officers are convinced it is not causing any harm, but through the revisions to the plan and the conditions that we've completely addressed that point.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Steele. Thank you.
Sorry,
we're done. Oh, and the questions. Yeah. Councillor Sharps.
Thank you. James, I would be very happy to have that condition added, but I would also like to consider, if we could, the fact that we have a condition on the cameras that they not be moved unless they come back to the planning for consideration.
Mr. Roger?
Well, the conditions we're proposing are making absolutely clear it's 4 CCTV poles and 3 floodlights there. It's tying down their location. On pages 95 and 96, to be quite blunt, we've tried to tie it down as much as we can.
So it is absolutely blunt as it can be, that it cannot be moved unless it has to come back for.
Yeah, that we haven't covered motion sensitivity, so that could be added. I mean, as I say, the agent referenced the monitoring regime. I'm not sure as a local planning authority officer I'd want to be delving into that, but that's up to you as a planning committee, because to me the key issue with the CCTV is that it's not affecting people's privacy, and And I think,
Yeah,
think
for
we've
me, on
covered that
those two,
part.
it was definite movement of the camera without coming back for planning permission and the sensitivity. I'll let my colleagues discuss the others.
Yeah, councillor Bambridge.
Yeah, I mean, this is somebody's piece of land. They've got every right to protect it, I think, and we've got the business of considering only the material considerations. And as such, really, that is protecting the neighbours from any nuisance if possible. The videoing, I think that's fine, but clearly to ensure that none of the land belonging to the houses themselves are visible within any of those recording areas. I think that is a reasonable thing because it's nothing, it is private property and it's nothing to do with the landowner. Regarding the lighting, I think it's essential that I noticed there's shielding shown on the heads of the lamp standards, that they're shielded to protect or prevent the light going into the properties or directly. We also want to minimize the amount of light generally upwards because of light pollution. And equally, we want to minimize any electric use. Obviously, it's money for the owner, but more importantly, it is using electricity unnecessarily. I've got a a movement sensitive light on my property, and you can adjust the sensitivity of it. You can also adjust the time that it comes on for, so it doesn't flicker on and off. So if it comes on, it stays on for 10, 15, 20 seconds or whatever it is. And then there's a period then where it won't come on again for so many seconds, which probably would be somebody gets into the land. I totally see the need for a light to come on rather than infrared, because somebody coming on the land realizes there's video there, realize they can be seen, they will get off that land pretty quickly. And it's not up to us really to think what the land's used for per se. It's the owner's land. If he wants to store timber on it, as it seems to be permitted, that's up to him. And certainly if timber was stored on it, I want that heavily protected from vandalism, because if you've ever seen a timber yard go up in smoke, which I've seen, it is quite a sight. So I think we've not in a position where we can prevent this from happening, but we are in a position to make it as acceptable as it possibly can be to the residents, and those would be my suggestions.
Okay. Mr. Barter.
Is there any scope, and I can already hear the word no, for making this subject to a review? If the lighting went in and started working, and in 6 months' time we could come back to it and say to the residents, to the neighbours, well, you're convinced that it won't do them any harm. And if we were to come back to the neighbours and say, well, do you now agree it's okay or not? Or have you got any issues? Is there any way that something like that could be conditioned?
Yeah, an interesting thought. Mr. Roger.
So I have actually been involved in sites where there's been very large sort of football stadia floodlighting. And there is a condition that can get imposed on that sort of consent that actually involves a sort of post-installation inspection by a lighting engineer. So these are lights mounted at 2.74 meters. There's 3 of them, and their sighting on the plan now is a very long distance. Sorry, it is a reasonable distance away from residential property, and the light Lux diagram is telling us that there shouldn't be light pollution, and the environmental health officer is saying so. So the question would then become, is such a condition unduly onerous given the scale of the development proposal? But in answer to your question, I am aware of such a condition being used on large scale football stadia floodlighting.
Thank you. Councillor Parker.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think actually James has actually answered one of the questions. They are mounted on a 2.74 metre pole.
It's a 3.66 metre high pole, but the actual light is at 2.74 metres. It's actually, it is mentioned in the
Yeah,
report. I wrote it down because
No, I've written it
I
down
made
as
a
well.
note that Rob hadn't mentioned it, and I thought
Yeah,
it might get asked.
Yeah, well, it just struck me that didn't seem very high to me for floodlights. The other one was, obviously, it can affect, we've heard it can affect the residents, but I don't know, if Rob could bring it up. But I wasn't sure when I was looking at the drawings where actually those poles were. I mean, I presume they're facing away from the residents.
Can we see where the
There-
poles were?
I can explain that the side of the site where the woodland and the river is. So you've got the residential boundary. Yeah, so I'll let Rob explain.
There'll be a distance, won't there, from the pole to the neighbour's property? Like a running track, for instance.
Yes, well, what do you want to know? The distance between the pole to the resident?
Is it, it's 3 poles, isn't it? 3 floodlights.
Yeah, they're on
So-
the right-hand side of the.
Yeah, I'm
image.
sorry, it's better when you've got the,
That's the houses.
Yeah, they're the cameras with
the
the,
red dot.
yes.
Where are the floodlights?
Have we got another plan?
You could perhaps understand why I'm slightly confused now.
I mean, this plan here shows the lights.
No, I get that. That's just the looks.
So sorry, Rob, if you refer to the photos.
Yes. Yes.
Well, in a way, so what's the distance from that pole to the boundary of the resident's property?
At its closest point is approximately 60 meters.
Sorry?
60 meters.
So
60 metres?
Yes, so
Between-
to explain
No,
that.
you mean
the-
that way.
I asked Rob to put that photo up, because you've got the properties on the far side.
Right.
So the floodlights are on the left-hand boundary of this photo, and the houses on the right-hand side of this photo, for there to be light pollution, the light would have to spill the entire width of the site, and then whereas what I'm saying is that they're 2.74 meters high and they're on this far boundary.
Right, so they're not at the back of the resident's property.
The CCTV poles are close to the back of the
No,
resident's
that's fine,
property.
so that's
But
just
the lighting
recording.
is the far side of the
I'm
site.
talking about the floodlights.
Yeah, the original proposal did involve lighting that would have affected the residents, but the revised proposal, the 3 floodlights are on this left-hand side.
So when they come on, what's the point of having the shields when it's the motorway the
Sorry,
other side? Or
The
not
shield
motorway?
is basically trying to prevent light spillage onto, that affects ecology. Yeah, the woodland behind, or I call it woodland.
Yeah, so I was which I get now, but I thought we were protecting the residents when we put in the shields on. We don't seem to be protecting the residents.
The lights are too far away to.
Yeah, because that's where they're situated.
Yeah.
But if we were coming down this side
Yeah.
and pointing that way, they'd be automatically facing away from residents' property.
So what the.
But we are dealing with the application
Yeah, I
before
know,
us.
So.
Yeah, thank you for bearing with me, Chair.
This is where the Lux diagram is helpful, because what it's telling us is that the light pollution dissipates to such an extent that it's effectively, it's not causing light pollution on the neighbours' properties, basically. So if they look out their back windows, in the distance, they'll see a light, but it's not the Lux diagram is telling us is not causing light pollution. It's not going to mean that they have to pull their curtains closed or anything like that.
Councillor Pritchard.
Very last question. When you look at page 91, the crime prevention officer and design officer don't really see any need for the, when they talk about antisocial behaviour, what sort of weight should we put on that? Because the police say they don't really see any reason for it.
Mr. Roger.
Well, the police officers effectively telling us that they don't have any recorded crime, but that's not really the matter before you. The matter before you really is the CCTV or floodlight causing harm to neighbours, which is a different issue in effect.
But when you look at there is no crime or disorder reason for the application in initial response, and that remains the case.
Yeah.
There is a difference between recorded crime statistics and what people will tell you in terms of crime, but in a way that's not, I think, the key issue before you. The key issue before you is we've put these comments are here because we would always share with you consultees' comments, but I wouldn't put much weighting on them, to answer your question.
Thank you. Councillor Sharps, were you coming in here?
Although you might not put much weight in them, I do. So I do like that the CPO has responded with a suggestion, read the condition, monitoring is advised by the CCTV is only of use in reducing crime and ASB if it is monitored at a timely reaction and response is made as a criminal activity. So yeah, I do take weight in what they say. So unfortunately, we're going to have to disagree, James. That doesn't often happen, but on this occasion it is happening. So I'm just going to say that, yes, I agree, a resident has absolutely the right to light their area and put CCTV on it. It is not when it outweighs another resident or residents' right for their own personal privacy and the way they have, the way they live. And I think that this one personally, when it came in originally, was one of the first things I've ever seen. And I congratulate you all on getting it down to these three. But I do think if we put in the conditions regarding the non-movement of cameras, the change of how often they can flash on, and we make sure that the CCTV is actually monitored, then this will make a difference to this particular application.
Thank you. Can you summarise where we've got to on the conditions then, Mr. Roger?
Well, I think the starting position is that the planning agent has actually said that on behalf of our client, they're happy to accept additional conditions, which is actually always very helpful because sometimes we don't know when we're adding conditions whether we have the agreement of the applicant or agent, but we do in this case. We talked about additional conditions to do with the motion sensitivity, that we would have details of that clarified, and that, to be frank, what we will be seeking to achieve is to ensure that the sensitivity is set that it's less likely to cause disturbance to neighbours, in effect, if I can put that succinctly as possible. And then there's a second condition that the agent referenced concerning a monitoring regime. I'm slightly less clear myself how that would work, but the agent has volunteered it, and we could, if members wished it to be added, I'm sure I could discuss further with the agent and we could agree a suitable wording. My only concern with that is whether we're going into whether it's a necessary condition in effect. I'm using that word because it's actually one of the relevant tests for planning conditions, that it should be precise, necessary, enforceable, etc. But if members think it is necessary, then the agents agreed it, and I'm sure we could come up with a suitable wording.
Any others? Is that it?
I don't think there was any other. Was there any other conditions?
Councillor Barter.
Yeah, tiny follow-up to my previous question. You're convinced this will have no adverse impact on the neighbours. Your reasons are plausible. But if with experience there is an impact, what comeback do the neighbours have? Presumably, they could go to planning enforcement.
Yeah, to answer that further, perhaps I should have come in earlier. Condition 4 is quite a long condition, and we've tried to ensure that it's clear that we not only require complete compliance with all of the lighting specification, but that for clarification purposes, it's the level of illumination, the angle of the light mountings, the shield location. So all of those details that were included in the lighting specification, we're expecting those to be met. So if the local residents, when the lighting is switched on, think this is like the brightest lights we've ever seen, I would be thinking, well, there probably hasn't been erected correctly, and that would then be an enforcement matter, because condition 4 is worded to ensure absolute compliance with the lighting specification that has in turn given us that Lux diagram that is telling us there shouldn't be a neighbour impact. So I don't know if that answers your question, but we've tried to condition this as strictly as possible.
Yes, you've conditioned the technicalities, but the assumption is, it may well be valid, that if these standards are complied with, there won't be an adverse impact on the neighbours. But if there is, despite complying with the condition, unlikely though I suspect you think that is, could they still go to planning enforcement?
I mean, separate from planning, there is a whole environmental health regime that does actually give some protection to local residents in terms of light pollution. So planning enforcement, if they completely met everything required for the light specification, planning enforcement wouldn't be able to ask them to turn the lights off if they'd fully complied. I guess the point I was saying that if there is light pollution, I think we'd first of all be asking planning enforcement to check that it has been erected correctly and to the specification which we've tied down. There is technically a fallback in terms of environmental health, in terms of light pollution. There's a separate regime there. So there is some slight comeback, but I wouldn't want to overstate it because one difficulty the environmental health team would have is that there'd be a grant of planning consent.
Councillor Sharps?
One question, if you put one up, can you ask for more to be put up afterwards? Based on the fact that you've had some given permission? Is this the open gate?
Well, the conditions on this planning permission are tying down the number, the details. We've tried to very tightly tie it down. So if they want to have 10 floodlights, they'll have to apply for 10, and that will be dealt with on its merits. So we are only, if members decide to approve this, it is only for 4 CCTV poles and 3 floodlights. The permission would be quite clear.
Can you summarise the recommendation and the additional conditions?
So
before I put the recommendation.
Well, the recommendation would be to approve. I think we're all in agreement that a motion sensitivity condition should be added.
Did you want to be more specific of that?
It would effectively be before the development is commenced, details of a motion, the scheme of details of motion sensitivity be submitted to and agreed in writing by the local planning authority. So it'd be, and then we normally add wording that it has to conform with the approved details. So along those lines, and then a similar sort of wording for a monitoring regime if members feel that is necessary. But I'd suggest through you, Chairman, that members need to decide whether they want that extra condition or not.
Okay. Would someone like to make me a proposal then? Councillor Sharps?
I'm happy to propose that we add the extra condition of monitoring for the CCTV.
As well as the motion sensitivity.
As well as the motion sensitivity.
Okay, do we have a seconder? Councillor Pritchard. Does anyone wish to speak? All those in favour, please show. Those against? Any abstentions? The recommendation's passed. Thank you. And finally, item 10, Kingsley Park Terrace.
This application.
Hold on.
Thank you, Chair. Just through you, just to advise for the public record and to draw your attention to the written updates, the application for 2 Clare Street has been withdrawn by officers and will not be considered at this committee tonight for the reasons set out in the written updates. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lyon.
Thank you, Chair. This application seeks full planning permission for the provision of new apartment building comprising of 13 residential apartments within use class C3B to provide specialist supported living accommodation, together with the retention of the ground floor retail units and conversion of the first floor into 2 standard C3 residential homes. One update has been received since writing the report. The local lead flood authority have made late representations advising that insufficient information have been provided on the proposed service water drainage scheme for the proposed development. While these concerns are noted, officers consider that the details can be dealt with by way of conditions, and that is contained within condition 8. Furthermore, I would point out that the site is a brownfield site and within flood zone 1. This plan shows the existing site, and the application site that you can see is that area which is hatched. The site comprises of existing resident retail properties. These will be retained, and these properties front the Kingsley Park Terrace and form part of the local centre. The plot extends along Chaucer Street to the rear, with a single-storey element, which is proposed to be demolished, and a new apartment building proposed in its place. This plan shows you the existing building and the existing ground floor, which shows the extent of the building and the coverage along the application site. These are the existing residential units here, and then you have the existing car workshop, single-storey building along there. This is the existing first floor plan, which currently shows 3 residential units, which are above the existing retail properties at the ground floor. These are just some existing elevations. This is the existing elevation which fronts Chaucer Street. This is side elevation looking at the application site from the adjoining neighbouring properties along Kingsley Park Terrace. And this is the existing front elevation which fronts the Kingsley Park Terrace. And for completeness, this is the side elevation which is along the Chaucer Street. So that image that I just showed was from this elevation along here. So this is the proposed ground floor. As you can see, the existing retail units are being retained. And then this is the new apartment building, which at ground floor comprises of 3 C3B assisted support living accommodations together with communal and you've also got cycle area and then 3 proposed parking areas here. This is the first floor, proposed first floor layout. So these are where the 2 residential properties will be located. The first residential property here will be a 2-bed residential dwelling, and then you have a 1-bed dwelling here. And then moving along here, you have further 5 C3B assisted living accommodations together with once again your communal shared area. And then moving to the loft accommodation is the remainder of the C3B assisted specialist support living accommodation. Moving to the proposed elevations, this is the elevation proposed along Chaucer Street. This is the parking areas, which you can see here, and this is the existing neighbouring property along Chaucer Street. This is the proposed elevation, which is taken from the adjoining neighbouring properties. The design and layout of the building is such that it's stepped away from the elevation, so there isn't any direct looking of the proposed windows into any of the existing first floor windows of the neighbouring properties. In terms of the ground floor and rear amenity spaces serving these neighbouring properties, these are all used by the existing ground floor commercial retail units. So they're not actually used for any residential private amenity spaces. They're just used by the existing commercial units. This is the proposed front elevation, which relatively remains unchanged to that which is existing. And this is the proposed elevation, which is taken along that alleyway of the existing neighbouring property along Chaucer Street. And these are just a few site photos. This is from the Kingsley Park Terrace frontage. And this is from Chaucer Street, showing the existing elevations, and you can see the single-storey car workshop area at the moment. And there's another photo of that building. So the recommendation is for approval, subject to conditions, and also subject to a Section 106 legal agreement relating to healthcare contributions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions to the officer? Mr. Connolly.
Yeah, I was just wondering, Nathan, obviously I know it's a quite intense one there with parking. I noticed Highways have stated they wanted a parking beat survey. I just wondered whether one was carried out.
Through you, Chair, no, one wasn't undertaken. Officers felt that because of its location within Northampton and the type of uses as well, so it's for large proportion of the units are C3B, so that is specialist support living for adults who need specialist care. So on that basis, we concluded that the actual car usage would be a lot lower in comparison to your normal C3 residential properties. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any further questions? Yeah.
The loft, is that assisted living in the loft? It's just I was wondering about evacuation procedures if these are assisted living supported adults.
Yeah, through you, Chair. Yes, the loft floor plan does show the assisted living accommodation, and there is 5 units proposed on the loft.
Right. Okay, any further questions? Councillor Parker?
Last one, honestly. If you go back to the last one, please. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. The last one. Stop, yeah. Mentioned in here was the refuse collections and things like that, where it be separated and things like that. Those three which are up there, who do they belong to? Because they're on the highway. They're not going to start using, other people are not going to start using the refuse, those large bins, are they?
So through you, Chair, yeah. So these refuge bins are in connection with the existing commercial units, which remain unchanged as part of this proposal. But as part of the proposal for this application at the ground floor, there is a bin storage area which will be used for the apartment building.
Right, thank you. So those are the three are on the highway, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
Right.
Because
Thank
of
you.
how the site is at the moment and how built out it is, there isn't any dedicated bin storage location for those commercial ground floor units at present.
No, but I'm just getting clarification.
Yes.
Those three bins are on the highway.
Yes, they are, yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Sharps?
Thank you. You made a comment regarding increase of parking. Is there any parking? I didn't.
Yeah, through you, Chair, there are three parking spaces proposed, which are here.
I can't see the cursor.
Oh, sorry, so they are the kind of like the green, the lime green area on the ground floor.
Okay, it's just that I would say that your comment regarding there will be less parking is maybe overly optimistic, but I'll go with it.
Thank you.
Right, moving to the debate then, who would like to lead that off?
Okay.
Councillor Sharps?
Okay, I think it's a good scheme, and I like all of the things I see combined within it, including the dedicated parking, which I can see now, and the bin store. I think it's a shame that we lose the loss of the front of this, but I can see that you're trying to keep the in keeping. So I'm in favour of this section.
Thank you very much. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Connolly. Does anyone wish to speak? You were proposing it, weren't you?
No, I was just saying I'm in favour of it, Chair.
Oh, I was taking you for granted, I guess. Thank you very much, Councillor Bambridge. Councillor Connolly, will you second that? Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak? Councillor Sharps? No. No. All right, we have a recommendation for an approval. It's been proposed and seconded. All those in favour, please show. That's unanimous. Thank you very much. And finally, before I close the meeting, there is no urgent business, but I would like to say to you all, it's a pleasure to work with all of you, and I wish you and your family a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. So let's go to it. Thank you very much for coming.